Welcome one and all. It's time for a red hot, spicy Kings of War tournament report. Not only spicy, but also ghoulish. This is TT tournament grabbed by the Ghoulies, the fifth of the TT tournaments, which take place in Sheffield, and the Abyssal Dwarfs are back with a twist. So, let's jump into the photos here. It is 2,300 points, and that's the same points level as Clash of Kings, so some people may have been tempted to stick with their list. I think the list I took to Clash of Kings went very well. Obviously I won more games than I lost, and overall I felt like I had really good board control with that list. The issues I had, the games I didn't win, were down to the lack of scoring units and what I deemed to be a lack of long-range threat projection. So there was one game that I lost where I ran out of scoring units too fast. I just didn't have enough of them, didn't have enough unit strength on the table, too many individuals that weren't scoring me any points. And another game where I just wasn't fast enough to reach the key enemy units quick enough. Even though it's a fast army, Abyssal Dwarf fast armies aren't as fast as other armies' fast armies, if that makes any sense to you. So, what have I done to try and tweak that list? So, we've ditched a load of the individuals, who I think are really good. I still think that list is very strong, but I want to try tweaking it to see if I can improve the success rate, or whether I find out that actually they're the key component of the list, and they can't be tinkered with. So, instead of having 3 half-breed champions and Bracky, we're just down to 1 half-breed champion. It's controversial because I think they're one of the best units, but this one has Scyther the Harvester, so it's going to be getting extra attacks against infantry and other small types. We've dropped a unit of gargoyles, so we're down to 3. So that is, if we look at the units the way I was using them, I was using 4 units of gargoyles and essentially 4 half-breed champions, one of them being Bracky, to get into positions to block off enemy units so that I could hit whatever I wanted and the enemy couldn't counterattack. So we've lost half of that potential, but it also means I can score more points because I've brought in a second grotesque champion. So we've got 2 of them now, and the big flyer, and when I show you the full army list, then you'll see what I'm trying to do to get super long range threat power into the list. I can see in the chat we've got Sindri, we've got Vorpal, and we've got Wraith already. Good evening. So, let's look at a couple of close-ups, shall we? We've got the Immortal Guard still in there, still sticking with the double grotesque, double half-breed unit. Now, this list isn't going to be all I ever use for Abyssal Dwarves or Kings of War for the rest of time, and I am going to mix things up, but this is just one last run at switching this list up a little bit and seeing if I can improve on what I already considered to be a very successful list at Clash of Kings. Let's see if these tweaks help. So, the Immortal Guard, given them Orb of Towering Presence, which is giving me a bit more unit strength, because that's something that was lacking. 3 Gargoyles, like I said, 2 half-breed regiments with the same upgrades, so 1 with Elite, Blessing of the Gods, 1 with the Boots of Striding. So I've still got lots of Strider in the list. They're still doing the same job. I think they work very well. Grotesque units with no upgrades at all. I don't think they really need upgrades because they're a horde, so you generally have to pay more for the upgrades you would want to put on them than you would do on a cavalry regiment, for example. And they already have all the special rules in the world, so what you're really going to add to them? They've already got the kind of thing that you would want to add to a unit through an upgrade, like Brutal, Fury, Strider. They just already have all these rules anyway. Half-breed champions, either the Harvester, there we go. 2 grotesque champions. Now, I have seen other people running this and shamelessly just copied it straight from their lists. So, one of them with Hand's Sanguinary Scripture, which grants Life Leech 1, and the other one with Aegis of the Elohai, which grants Iron Resolve. So, extra ways of getting some wounds back on these 2. And they're the kind of thing you shouldn't ideally be getting them killed off in one hit, because you can kind of pick and choose what they're fighting. They're fast enough, they're nimble, they've got a small base, so you shouldn't be getting double charged too much unless it's intentional. So hopefully I'll get some use out of those upgrades. Then the Overmaster on Ancient Winged Half-Breed has the Brew of Haste. Now, with this kind of list, there are so many grotesque and half-breed units, which are abomination keyworded. So you might think, why not bring in the spellcaster on the, what's that one called? Greater winged half-breed, is it? That one gets extra spellcasting power when surrounded by these types of units. And I have run that list before. But the reason I want to include this flyer in the list is because I want something that's speed 11 that can hit hard from a very long distance away. So I'm thinking I'm going to have probably the fastest model on the table in 99% of the games, because people don't usually do this. It's not something you see all the time. Very rarely I run across an enemy that has a speed 11 big scary flying titan. Now I don't think this unit is actually good for the points, but you don't have other options that do this same job in the list. That same job of being ridiculously fast and also being a combat threat at long range. The wizard version certainly does not, because it's got less attacks and it hits on 4s, so definitely way less of a threat than this one. So mostly you can still use this for board control, because you can shut down a big area of the table where the enemy are going to be terrified to leave any flanks open. On the other hand, is it the kind of unit that is only going to thrive when the enemy are making mistakes? Because if you force it to hit anything in the front, it's not going to do that much, and it's grounded then, and suddenly the threat's gone. So if you've got an army where you're capable of blocking up flanks and staying nice and compact, is it going to suffer in those situations? Or can I maybe draw enemy units out into a position where I can strike at their flanks? We shall find out anyway. Am I going to miss the extra gargoyles and all the half-breed champions? Let's find out, because in round 1, up against the undead. So we have got a zombie horde, we've got a revenant horde, so 2 big infantry hordes with high nerve. We've got 2 troops of wraiths, so defense 6, but nerve not obscenely high. And they're not super fast either, but they do fly, so they're hard to block off. A lot of shambling in this list as well. Those 2 are shambling, all of these are shambling. 2 units of werewolves that are not shambling, but they're very fast, nimble, speed 9. So normally with my fast Abyssal Dwarfs, these guys would have the monopoly on speed on the table. But not in this instance, because I've got the one big flyer that's a lot faster than them. Zombie troll horde, 2 small troops of revenant cavalry, with some nice speed there, and good nerve for a small unit with defense 5. A Gorblight, which is pretty decent at fighting and hands out Cloak of Death, which is obviously annoying. If you're running a list with high defense, you don't want to see Cloak of Death, because the enemy is just getting that off quite easily. Obviously for free, kind of, because if you've got high defense, you think the enemy's going to have to pay a lot of points to put damage onto you, but with Cloak of Death, it's just straight up damage regardless of your defense. So they're getting good value out of it against a high defense opponent. 2 necromancers, one with the Inspiring Talisman, one with the Conjurer's Staff for a bit of re-rolling. So plenty of surge in there, and some weakness on both of them. So that, if you're doubling down on keeping these units alive, then weakness is good. 2 sources is more than you normally see in lists, because often the enemy will have 1 prime unit that's getting ready to charge into you. That's the most dangerous one that you would want to cast weakness on. But with 2 lots of it, I suppose you've got 2 goes, and it's not like these necromancers are doing nothing otherwise, because they've both got surge as well. And there's usually something that you want to weakness in every turn, generally. Then there's a standard bearer with the Loot of Insatiable Darkness for some Bane chant, which is pretty straightforward. Then there's Morgoth the Faceless. So flying around pretty fast and casting spells all over the place. Bane chant, Drain Life, Mind Fog, and Big Surge. So potential Big Surge is coming up, and then there's Lycanis for just a long range, little nimble hero. Not too many attacks, but still quite good for the points. And the first mission is Invade. So we need to get our units majority inside the opponent's half to score their unit strength. So the enemy unit strength is 22. Mine is 23. Total units 12, enemy total units 15. So the enemy have got more units, but I've got slightly more unit strength. It's just looking at the picture, it looks wild, but it's because there are things in here that don't have a lot, such as the Gorblight is only 1, You've got the Lycanis is only 1, and then all these individuals are obviously no unit strength, so that's a lot of points there tied up in 0 unit strength. I've only got the 1 unit that can't score. So already we can see the benefits of the changes to the list. So what is my plan here? Because we've got mostly onto this side of the table, and my opponent is kind of skewed onto that side of the table, particularly with the fast units. So all the werewolves and the Lycanis are over there. I've got a bit more balance, but most of my fast stuff and scary stuff is on this side, the big flyer. So I have, let's see, how many drops was it? 15. So I had to finish putting my units down before any of the werewolves were on the table. So I couldn't specifically counter them with the flyer. So whichever side I put my flyer on, because I want to use it to threaten a flank, ideally, then my opponent can just put all the werewolves on the other side and not worry about it too much. So, what is the plan here? Werewolves are a big threat. I would very much like this grotesque champion being in woods and suffering maybe some hindered charges would be very difficult to take out. And then I've got these other units. The half-breeds there, these ones are elite, and the half-breed champion as backup on this side. Gargoyles invade. For them, it depends how you want to use them. If you want to throw them out there as chaff, obviously you are losing their unit strength pretty rapidly, and you can't then use it at the end of the game to try and boost up your scoring power. But if you don't use them as chaff, then you risk getting multi-charged a lot more. So we'll see what I decide to do with that. 2 grotesques in the middle, and invade, kind of like control. You don't need to necessarily cover the entire table, unless your opponent's got vastly more unit strength than you and they're fully on one side and you are fully on the other side, in which case you do have to start thinking about spreading out. I think when it's kind of even unit strength, if you both commit one flank forward and get into the other half, you don't have to worry about that too much if you're going to win the fight in the centre, because ultimately you're going to end up with more in there. Then, over on this flank, we've got the big flyer, we've got the other half-breeds, we have got one of the grotesque champions. I've put a token on one of them just so we can tell them apart which one's which. So this one is the one with life leech, the one that I've put a token on, just so my opponent knows which one's which. Some gargoyles over there for backup as well. So there we've got the Revenants, the Revenant Cavalry, the Trolls. Oh, also, another thing to point out, in addition to our lists, we also have the Ghoulie Grabber. So, the special character for this event is a little infantry hero who is pretty good at fighting. I think this is the enemy Ghoulie right there. Has 3 attacks, which doesn't sound great, but if you hit with a 6, then it explodes into multiple hits, and if you do damage with one of those, then the enemy unit is -1 to hit in close combat in the next round. So potentially a useful unit, and also it has dread. So, let me see, where did I put mine? My Ghoulie Grabber is right there, in front of the half-breed champion. You can just about see it. It's a little Abyssal Dwarf slave driver with the whip removed, because I just didn't like the idea of that really thin, flimsy metal whip. But the weapon that it's actually carrying does have a bit of a grabber on the end of it, so I thought that was suitable as a Ghoulie Grabber, and it's a good reason to paint up a model that's just been sitting in my box for years. Okay, so as we go down here, we've got the Wraiths, some nice terrain going on here. Some of the buildings, obviously not painted, but some nice little characterful touches next to them. Then all the werewolves and some Wraiths out on this side. There's Morgoth, who's obviously a big threat. The thing with the gargoyles, when Morgoth's around, that is a concern, because he does have... What's the spell he's got? Let me go back a second and double check his spells. Mind Fog, that's the one. So Mind Fog actually has a half-decent chance of killing gargoyles on its own. So you don't want them left out in the open at the back where Morgoth can target them. So, in we go, and I am going first. So, what do I do immediately? Push everything up onto the hill. So I'm going to have the threat coming down off the hill with extra Thunderous Charge, which may be useful against the Wraiths, who are defense 6, so I would definitely like to have that. In the middle, staying out of charge range of most of the dangerous stuff, if not everything in the first turn, but taking up a useful position. The grotesques, and I think on the opposition it's only the Goreblight, which is this Beholder. I think those are the only things, and the big dragon obviously, that can see over hills. So anything that's on one side of a hill potentially can't see over. I've put my half-breed champion with its toe poking onto the hill just so it can see over if the enemy push forward into this area. And on this side, the grotesque champion and the big flyer just staring down the enemy flank. If you want to advance really fast, you better do it in a big straight line, otherwise you're getting flanked. If you leave anything behind, then the big flyer can probably see you and charge you over the top. So you've got to be very careful, and because it's invade, you don't want to waste time hanging back, especially with shambling units, because if the fight starts taking place slightly inside your half, and you struggle to get through the enemy, then you're going to also struggle to score as the game goes on. If the fight's taking place here, even if you win the fight, your units aren't going to be in a position to score at the end. So you want to be fighting as close to, if not slightly into the enemy half, if you can, on this scenario. So, turn 1 for the enemy. And you can see that lines of sight are being checked here to make sure that these werewolves aren't going to get charged by a grotesque champion. So those guys are currently sitting just out of his arc of sight, I believe, we determined. And various ranges are being marked here to make sure that the enemy aren't getting into charge range of units they don't want to. And it's not too huge of an advance. I think the halfway line on the table is about here. So I do have some charges available to me now, but not all of the charges. So this guy, you obviously can't stop him charging. It's 22 inches. He's going to hit something, whatever you do, unless you camp right at the back, which you can't do in invade. You can see, by the way, that I've got my gargoyles hidden perfectly behind the half-breeds, so no one like Morgoth thinks of popping out and shooting them, which would be very mean. And weakness is cast successfully on my grotesque champion out here and the Overmaster, which I'm not too concerned about, because I'm not planning to be killing too much instantly anyway. Now, going into my next turn, so that should be a picture of the number 2, by the way, on the dice, not the 1. So, we've got a mistake coming up by me, and before I describe that, I feel a sneeze coming on, so I'm going to mute myself temporarily. That was a false alarm, for now. So, what am I going to do with this turn? Because I do not like this flank. Werewolves, I'm not going to be able to hold them up forever. So I ideally want to crunch all this lot with, if you look at all these units I've got here, this is more than enough to deal with this. Because what is it really? It's one big blob of revenants, a couple of small cavalry units, some wraiths and some zombie trolls. Everything else are support individuals, and there's a Goreblight. I think these units that I've got here that can fight well are a big enough threat to take out this portion. This bit of the enemy army I would just like to hold up. So if I can encourage them over here perhaps with the grotesque champion, and in fact I'm going to put him in the woods and tempt the enemy to come and get me, because I just want to win this fight in the middle without werewolf interference. So if I can draw as many of those units as possible over to this side, that's the dream. Because even if all those units end up getting into my half and camping there, I think I would crush all this, and then I would have more unit strength among this lot. So I want to get stuck in and fighting things, but it's undead, and you don't want to get surged into your flank. So what are the ways you can avoid that? You can try and block the path to your flanks by using supporting units, or you can hold back until you think you can go in and hit all the units at the same time, because if they're all hit, then they can't just turn on the spot or sidestep to hit a flank, for example. So let's have a look. This is what I decided to do, and you can see those knights have been moved, but their base is still there. So I throw my big dragon into those knights, thinking probably not going to kill them in one hit, but I might. And if I do, I think that is a big deal, because then I can turn to face this sort of way, making sure that the Goreblight and the zombie trolls couldn't get my flank at all, because I'd be facing kind of in that direction, so they shouldn't be able to reach my flank. But I probably won't kill the knights, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flap up some gargoyles and heavily congest that area, and make sure that the enemy can't really get to me too easily. However, just from eyeballing it from my side of the table, it's actually a lot less congested in reality from what I was seeing from my side, and I'll explain when we get some close-ups over there in a minute. On this side, we've got the Grotesque Champion in the woods. We've got the half-breeds on the hill. They actually back up a bit to make sure they're not going to get charged by any werewolves. And they're just there to provide cover to make sure no one's going to press into this area, to make it more tempting for the enemy to go this way instead of camping here and getting hit by my cavalry, who are just about fully on the hill, more than 50% on the hill. So anything that camps here, these guys could definitely kill. I've got my Ghoulie Grabber, I've got the Immortal Guard there as well, who are just going to provide a solid speed bump to go and camp here if I need to protect the area as well, if the enemy decide to ignore this bait and just push straight into the middle. So, let's have a look over here. Now, what I was thinking was that because of all these units around here, it was going to be quite difficult with my gargoyles there, and I think I actually could have got my gargoyles even closer. I don't know whether I could have charged them in. Let me go back. So they might be too far away to actually charge anything, but it's possible they could have done if I'd got the grotesques out of the way. So, but because I felt that I had congested the area enough, I didn't feel the need to try and set that up. But looking back, definitely I should have tried to make space, if they're in range, to let the gargoyles charge maybe one of the individuals, because that would definitely block up the enemy and prevent any kind of surge shenanigans. But what I thought was the case was that this Goreblight was actually overlapping behind that unit, so that if my opponent wanted to get the zombie trolls into the flank of the Overmaster, they would have to back up every other unit and not fight with them. And even then, they wouldn't be able to go and move within an inch of my gargoyles, who I possibly could have got even closer actually. I don't think it's an inch away there. I think I was just eyeballing it and was a bit lazy there with the distance. I think maybe I could have got them closer. So it would have been tricky for them to turn sideways to then be surged into the Overmaster anyway, if I'd had the gargoyles position right. And yes, but as it stands now... So my opponent did actually explain, by the way, that the positioning of these units, I think it's maybe the little base is either too big or it's slipped a bit. But it was actually explained to me that these units are all aligned next to each other and not overhanging slightly in front. I think you can see where the angle was slightly opened up there because it slipped a little bit off the tray. So it actually looks to me like this unit is behind that unit, which meant all of the units would then have to go backwards to make space for the zombie trolls to get through, which I didn't think they could because I thought I had the gargoyles close enough anyway. Which obviously I haven't. And that's going to be an issue, because this unit can go backwards, they can go backwards, these guys can all move out of the way, and because the gargoyles aren't close enough, because of my lazy positioning, which I think may have been possible to get them close enough, maybe I could have even tucked them like in there, which would have prevented the zombie trolls from being able to turn round and set up a surge entirely. As it is now, they can turn this way and get to about here, and then surge into the flank and everyone else move out of the way. Which isn't horrifically bad, because it gets me into the enemy, and it's not guaranteed the zombie trolls would kill them. It depends if a Bane chant goes off, whether it's likely to succeed or not, but there's a decent chance they would kill it in one go. But my kind of lazy eyeballing of this situation, and not factoring in that maybe actually all these units wouldn't have to move, because the Goreblight can maybe still charge in now, because actually it should be that they are perfectly lined up with each other. But when it was explained to me, I think in my ear I was hearing it as their frontage of some of the units was lined up, rather than this unit was lined up perfectly alongside this unit, because you can see how it slipped there slightly in front. So it's not looking good for the Overmaster now, because obviously I haven't killed the Knights in one round. I did some damage though. Grotesque Champion has gone in there to lock down the Revenants, and I've got all my other units up there ready to strike next turn. Gargoyles landing to provide chaff. Half-breed Champion in there to block the cavalry. So we're still doing the blocking strategy, but didn't pay off there. Into the enemy turn, you can see obviously what was allowed to go on here, because the enemies were able to get out of the way. The Goreblight was still able to charge into the front of the Overmaster because of the alignment issue I was talking about, and these guys just had to go backwards. And the gargoyles weren't really providing any kind of cover whatsoever here, which is very unfortunate. So we'll see if that gets killed. Then, this part is looking okay because my opponent is checking out whether the two werewolf hordes are going to be a good fit in there against the Grotesque Champion, and whether I can see them with this unit, which I can. So the idea is that if they want to double charge, then my half-breeds are going to be able to charge one of them, which may tempt my opponent to just charge one unit of werewolves in so I can't countercharge. However, one unit of hindered werewolves are not going to kill this guy in one round. So, is that too much of a risk? Because if you throw 2 in and you don't kill him, then you get flank charged by these guys, unless you can block it somehow. And Lycanis's base is not big enough for you to successfully do that. So they both decide to go in, so you have to kill him, and you have to be able to then have space to turn around and make sure you're not getting flanked. So if you don't kill him, it's basically good night werewolves. Lycanis pushing up behind them, and you can see that this whole section of the army is now not engaged with most of my army. It's now dealing with entirely this one guy. So I think this section is actually working out okay game plan wise. This area maybe not so much because of this issue that I described. We have Mr. Hawley in the chat, who is the TO for this event, by the way. Let's see. Nice to see the battle report. Hope you enjoyed the tournament. Thank you very much for the buns. Yes, I did provide some lovely spiced apple cakes for the event as well, which seemed to be a big hit. But yes, it was a nice venue compared to the venue for the last TT event that had some issues with it. My personal issue with the previous venue was entirely down to non-tournament reasons, which is because, actually I've got it right here in fact. So the previous ones were at the Outpost, and I'm looking right here at my Obsidian Platinum Lifetime Membership card, which expires 27th of December 9,999, which I would query anyway because I was actually planning to live longer than that. But then when there was an event there, I showed my card and said, hey, what do I get for this? I've never looked into it before. And apparently nothing anymore. They just discontinued the benefits for it. Which you would think, if you're going to give out lifetime Platinum Obsidian memberships, you would have some token gesture to people who have got one, even if you're going to cut off the main benefits, like a discount. Then you would think that maybe they would like offer you a cup of tea or something when you go into the shop once a week. Just as a little token gesture to say, yep, we acknowledge you've still got this, rather than just saying, oh no, we don't support that anymore. Even if what the gesture wasn't anything substantial, that would still be something, and it would feel like you were still that lifetime member. But anyway, enough ranting about the Outpost. I think I talked about that at length in the last TT tournament video. So this one's not at the Outpost. This was at a... Is it technically a pub or a social club? Something like that? I think it's technically a social club. But the tables were nice. You can see we've got plenty of terrain on the table. All the tables were well stocked with terrain, not too sparse, which is what we like to see when I've got lots of Strider in the list. Anyway, where were we? Let's continue and see if anything gets killed. So, some weakness has been thrown out again onto some of my grotesques. Bane Chant onto the werewolves. So that's a lot of overkill here. 2 of them, I think, would have possibly dealt with this guy quite easily even without Bane Chant, even hindered. Because if you're hindered, they're hitting on 4s, so you're going to get like 18 hits on him. And one of them is Crush 2, and one of them is Crush 1, I think. So I think you would do plenty of damage there. The Revenants do 5 damage to the Grotesque Champion up there. Loads of damage being dealt to the Overmaster, and he gets killed. So, yes, the issue, I don't know whether the trolls on their own actually did enough damage to kill him, but they definitely would have been close anyway. But this guy was the big issue from the misconception that I had about the positioning of the units. Which was not down to my opponent, by the way, because he did communicate it, I just misunderstood that communication. So, over here you can see the gargoyles get killed by the ghoulie grabber, which is actually not a bad thing necessarily, because now I can charge him potentially and overrun into something else, or charge into the other units around here. And the half-breed champion takes 2 wounds, does not get wavered, which is good because he can charge off and attack something else if he wants now. And the grotesque champion in the woods does get killed, but it was pretty close. You can see only 9 damage, I think. unless that dice was a 6 and just fell off. So he's dead, and then the werewolves turn round. So this bit is still kind of going to plan. We've got a lot of stuff here that isn't contesting my army advancing into the enemy half, and all this fight is taking place around about the halfway line. So, we'll see. And werewolves can't see over the hill, by the way. So they are locked in this position, at least temporarily, unless I give them a target. So what am I going to do in my next turn? I do not want to get hit by the werewolves too much, but charging them is probably a good idea. Charging something here anyway. If I charge Lycanis, I think that unit can still see me, but I've got a more chance of killing him. And these two units can be surged, so you don't really want to be messing about in the middle there, ideally. So my turn 3. Let's throw everything in. So I charge Grotesques into the Trolls, Half-Breeds and the Grotesque Champion into the Revenants. So I'd hope to finish them off this turn. I think I've had to use my Boots of Striding, possibly. Maybe not. I can't remember if I slid far enough down to get into the woods there. Gargoyles just as backup there. We have got the other Grotesques flank charge the Revenant Cavalry. And the Gargoyles, I think... The Gargoyles may have hit them in the front or just landed here perhaps. But these ones went in there, splat into the flank after these ones went into the Trolls. So they went splat, splat. And then this guy charged over here. So... you can see he doesn't kill them, and if we go back actually you can see that I do not kill the big Revenant Horde yet, despite this big, strong cavalry unit charging them. Not quite done enough yet. Don't kill the zombie trolls either, so the Gorblight is now going to be able to maybe flank charge somebody, which is bad. I was hoping to probably kill this unit with 2 rounds of attacks from the Grotesque Champion and a round from the Half-Breed Cavalry. I would hope that would be enough. But it's certainly not a guarantee because they are pretty tough. And there has been weakness thrown around at some of my units as well. So, let's see, which unit was weakened of the Grotesques? Let me go back and check. So one of them definitely was, wasn't it? It was this one on the right. So this is the one that charged the cavalry in the flank. And the reason I did that is because I thought the weakened unit of Grotesques would definitely not be enough to kill these trolls. So... that's why I put in the fresh unit that's not weakened in there and the weakened unit into the flank of the knights where they'll have 1 billion attacks. So I was feeling okay about that. Over on this side, I kill the first unit of werewolves with the half-breeds, who are now going to get multi-charged, but we can live with that. And I've also got the Ghoulie Grabber right there as well, who... he is an individual, he's not mighty, but because he's standing right there, that's maybe going to limit how many units can hit the half-breeds now. Because you can't end the charge move on top of him. And it would have been nice if this guy had killed the Wraiths, but that would have been a long shot at defense 6. So, into the enemy turn. And I decided after the loss of my flyer, by the way, that I had to be very aggressive here. Because if I start holding back, eventually the werewolves will come in and they'll just beat me, like here. And that's fairly close to my half. If they're going to come in and beat me at all, I want it to take place up here, so that they can't then get into my half for the invade mission. So, we've got multiple charges going in on the half-breeds on the hill, which I'm not too disappointed about, because it's more units that are concentrated purely on this little area of the table. And we've still got support here as well. The half-breed champ gets charged by the zombies. The Immortal Guard's job is going to be to block up this flank next. And all is not lost in this area. So the Wraiths turn round so that they can be surged into the Grotesques, I think. And they do end up being surged into the flank. Now, the way that you surge into a flank, I think it's fine because you're touching the corner and then you line up there. If you're flush to them, like perfectly aligned with them and you surge in, I think you end up in the front then, don't you, with the way surge works. But because they're at an angle and they hit the corner, they can then line up there. Perfectly fine. You can see damage being splashed around by the Gorblight whenever he lands anywhere, just putting a wound onto various units nearby, which is a good ability. And let's have a look if anything gets killed. So, the Grotesques here get killed. They get hit by a lot, so it's not surprising. These ones do not get killed by the Wraiths in the flank. This guy does not really care about being attacked by zombies. The half-breeds do get killed there. And everyone turns around to face the Immortal Guard. And that's it. So, into my turn, what are we going to do here? I can countercharge the Wraiths, but they're defense 6 and I'm weakened, so that's going to be a bit tricky. The Immortal Guard are still kicking, so they can maybe charge Wraiths there. The Gargoyles can charge the flank of something, possibly. These Gargoyles could charge... I don't know what they can actually see over the hill. They could hit the Gore-Blight. So on to my turn 5. They do charge the Gore-Blight, and I've managed to finish off the Revenants with the Half-Breeds and the Grotesque Champion. Maybe a turn too late. If it had happened the previous turn, I'd be much happier about everything here. The Grotesques killed the Wraiths because they were supported by the Half-Breed Champ who joined in and then turned to face this way. So the Ghoulie Grabber's right there, you can see. The Immortal Guard charge into the Wraiths, so they're going to get hit by a lot of stuff. But they are congesting this area now. Even nimble werewolves are going to struggle to get round and hit anything else because of the amount of pivots required. So some of them will be able to, but not all of them. Now, because the werewolves can get past here, because the Ghoulie Grabber did not do any damage to them, if he had done 1 damage to them, I think it would have prevented a lot of the things that they could potentially do now. Because he failed to do any damage, they can now turn this way, head over here, turn that way, and charge in there. If he damaged them, then they couldn't then start charging through him, which they currently can because he's not mighty. So that failure to do damage there is maybe going to hit this unit in the rear, but they were going to get hit by something, and got to take risks now. However, Lycanis might be stuck, because if the zombies charge in the flank here, there's not going to be enough space for him to get back behind them to hit anybody. And I don't think he's got enough pivoting to go around this way, in addition to the werewolves. So, turn 5 for the enemy. We've got zombie trolls in the front. We've got Gore-Blight fighting the Grotesque Champion. We've got Revenants fighting the Gargoyles. We've got zombies in the flank, Lycanis and the Wraiths into the Immortal Guard. We've got werewolves in the rear of the Grotesques. And it feels like it's been an uphill struggle since I got my flyer needlessly killed early on. Then you can see that the Gargoyles are dead, of course. The Grotesques are dead from that sandwich action. The Immortal Guard, do they live? They take a lot of wounds, and they die. And the enemy are obviously now worried about the scenario. They want to make sure they can score. So, even though I'm down to how many scoring units? 3. I might currently be winning the game at this stage, because I don't know if the zombies are enough across the centre line to score yet. So, what I want to do, ideally, is wipe out all these units, which is obviously easier said than done. But failing that, if I kill the Gore-Blight and the cavalry, I can try and use the Gargoyles to block the werewolves and the zombie trolls from getting into my half by just parking them here in front of them. And the undead might run out of time to get enough points into my half to win if I can kill enough. It's going to be tricky though, because how much unit strength are these? If they're about 3, he's 1, they're 1, so that's about 5. I've got 5 in there right now. I think this area here where the Gargoyles are going to land is technically my half, but obviously I'd be throwing them away to do that. But if they don't do it, the werewolves just march in there and win. So I need to block them off. This guy, sadly, cannot help. He could try and charge them and hurt them, but he can't actually get round here because he would be moving within an inch of the enemy wherever he goes. The gaps aren't big enough for him to get there, which is very sad. And I think I can mop up these units, because the Grotesque Champion is it taller than a Gore-Blight? I don't remember. It may well be, so I think I can actually see the flank of this unit. So he can charge in there, cavalry into the Gore-Blight, so I can wipe out both of those. But we have to rely on weird shenanigans now, so let's see what I can do. Okay, so you can see that the Gore-Blight is dead, and I actually charged the Grotesque Champion into the rear of the zombie trolls instead, because I determined that actually they're more points, they're higher unit strength, and I can see them. So I'm just going to charge into the rear of them and then kill the Gore-Blight with the half-breeds. So that's what I go for in the end, and succeed. The zombie trolls are dead, Gargoyles parked in front of the werewolves, These knights are still there, but I'm now aimed pointing at them so that if they do move forward into my half and there's another turn, I could charge them. So setting up maybe for turn 7. And it depends how far they can go with the surge. If they get way into my half and I charge them, I'd just get stuck there and wouldn't be scoring with my one good scoring unit. But it could be a case of just make sure that I maximise kill points now to get bonus tournament points. The Ghoulie grabber charged into the wraiths to stop them flying, and had that been a success, that would have also held up the zombies and possibly stopped them fully embracing my half of the table as well. But unfortunately, he doesn't do any damage. Again. So the Ghoulie grabbers let me down in this game. Because I think overall the strategy is kind of worked, because I've got the fights taking place inside the enemy half, apart from the units that I didn't care about, which were down here, and now they've had to come back in and help in the middle, in this fight which is taking place where I wanted it, which was about here. It's just, it took me a bit too long to chew through the enemy. My big flyer threw its life away needlessly because I didn't pay enough attention to the table. And yeah, that's the main reason that it's not looking too great right now. You can see in the enemy turn, Lycanis and the Wraiths just flop over the Ghoulie grabber's head because they're not grounded. Zombies are going in there as well. So I need to turn 7 and I need to kill a lot of things now. The Gargoyles are getting charged by the Werewolves also. The Revenants get surged about 16 inches, I think. So they're well into my half now, so I can't really afford to charge them with that unit anymore. So, if there's a turn 7, what can I do? Just try and kill as much as possible. So I could certainly kill the Werewolves with probably a rear or flank charge. I could charge these guys into the flank of the Werewolves, possibly. I could try and roll over several individuals, maybe, with them. And these two could try and kill something, because I'm definitely not going to win now, because there's too much unit strength in my half after the Ghoulie grabber didn't hold anything up. Let's see if there's a turn 7. There is. So, we've got the half-breeds who... I'm giving up on the scenario now, just going for kill points. Charge into the Werewolves and double one them. That would have been nice. The Ghoulie grabber doesn't kill the Wraiths. And what else was there in the middle? I don't think I killed much else. I might have got one of the individuals, possibly. And then in the enemy turn, the Werewolves, who obviously were double wand, countercharge into the half-breeds with the final insult and kill them after being double wand. Oh well. Other than that, that's the end of the game. So obviously it's a loss for the Abyssal Dwarves. I feel like the game plan was okay. The execution obviously needed a bit of work, and the big flyer not really doing the work so far, but that was entirely down to me. I could have done more with it. I could have tried to get it behind the enemy instead of throwing it in, but I wanted to get through the big bulk part of the undead force before the werewolves could come back to support. I think I did a good job over here, holding up the werewolves, tempting them into the woods, in a position where they felt they had to go in double rather than single, which kept them behind a hill as well and delayed them and kept them out of the game a little bit, and then allowed me to kill one of them as well with the backup unit. Maybe what I could have done was move my... Instead of charging them, in fact, tried to move out of their line of sight and just get off the hill entirely, or set up to do that in the previous turn so that I could back up, because they couldn't charge me over the hill. They would have to walk onto the hill, giving me another turn where I can then deal with them, and another turn of them not being a threat. So maybe I should have done even more to delay the werewolves. And I'm definitely missing all the half-breed champions and the extra unit of gargoyles. It would have been nice to have more chaff, because you could see the issue up in this area. I got a few flank charges into me, and I could have definitely blocked those with more chaff units. Into the next round, and the scenario is loot. And we're up against the spiky green menace, the orcs. We've got 2 regiments of Morax. We've got 3 units of long axe. One is a regiment with the staying stone. 2 hordes, one with Helm of Confidence, one with Healing Brew. So the Morax are the ones that have lots of attacks, and the long axe have phalanx. So that is 3 big phalanx units, which is like the nightmare matchup for my army in some ways, because I'm mostly flyers and cavalry. So I do not want to fight them at all, so we'll see if the setup allows me to avoid them. 1 regiment of Orklings, a war drum for rallying, which is very handy, a Crudger, on a Gore with Gnome Glass Shield for defense 6 until it takes damage, so that's going to be tough to wound. A God Speaker with Bane Chant, very useful. Everything's already Crush 1, so it's going to be very scary against my army. There's Whip the Outcast, who has Heal, Hex, Lightning Bolt, and Weakness. So as soon as I see Lightning Bolt, I think, okay, Gargoyles, you're in trouble. But there's only one lot of Lightning Bolt, so we'll see. Then there is a Crudger on Winged Slasher, which is this Hero Titan there, with the Blade of Slashing, so it's slower than my big flyer. There is then the Gore Chariot, Molgurk's Mad Mob, which is a chariot regiment, and that's got the Boots of Striding. There is a Gore Chariot regiment that doesn't have any upgrades on it, and there's a War Drum on a chariot as well with Bane Chant. So 2 lots of Bane Chant and 2 War Drums, so plenty of rallying, so that's quite terrifying. Here is the layout, and I'm trying a new idea that I've had for loot type scenarios for a while, but usually I've had it in my head for a while, this concept, but the enemy is usually not the perfect opponent to be using it on. So the idea is that the gargoyles stare at the objectives at this kind of angle. If I get the first turn, they fly and then turn round 90 degrees to face this way. So they're touching the objective, they pick it up, and they're facing off in a diagonal line like this. So, if the enemy aren't going to reach me to stop me, they can move at the double, which at that point would be 10 inches, because it slows them down. They would start walking off this way with the objective, and try and line it up so they're not going to hit any difficult terrain that slows them down. What I've done in the past is deploy them like here, fly onto it, and then turn 90 degrees, but you're looking across the table then. So, I think with this sort of angle, you can get, oop, like that. And that's what I'm trying here. Now, counters to that would be any kind of fast or shooting unit staring right at the objective, because as soon as you do this, they can then just kill you. But there's only one lot of Lightning Bolt, it's only Lightning Bolt 3, it could fail, so I'm still going to try it. All the other fast stuff is out on this flank, so I'm only doing it with these 2 objectives, because I've got another unit of gargoyles out on the left here. So that's the plan. We'll see if it pays off. The other objective I'm not too concerned about because it's behind a building. I put this objective down first, and then my opponent then had a choice of whether to try and group all the objectives together or spread them out further, and decided to put one here, which is okay with me, and I think I've got the angles correct to pull this off. The only thing that's a threat is Whip. This unit is a phalanx unit, this one is, and this one is. The Morax are behind there and there. So I don't want to fight any of these units. So you'll see I've not really deployed anything in the centre, because I do not want to fight any of the phalanx units at all. I don't mind fighting the chariots, and I've got a lot of speed out on this flank to deal with them. And I've got my other fast wing on this side, but I'm mostly going to avoid them. Mostly avoid the phalanx and maybe use the Immortal Guard to fight them, who don't suffer a penalty against phalanx, and the Ghoulie Grabber also does not, so that's why they're in the middle. And I'm going to try and box them in. Because it's orcs, they have these big wide units. If I were to park a unit of gargoyles there, that holds up everything for a turn. So that's my usual plan against these massive blocks of troops. Just try and block them up one at a time, just a couple of sacrifices here and there, and chaff them up, and try and run away with the objective. So this unit of gargoyles could well be used as chaff. These 2 are going to try and grab the objective. Okay, there's the tactics. Let's see if it works. We've got the big flyer out on this side as well, because if we look actually, this unit, I could land about here, and I'm not in charge range. If I'm on this flank and I advance, suddenly there's a flyer, there's chariots, things can hit me. I can advance a lot further on this flank without worrying about the enemy hitting me. I can land here, face that way, because I've got it facing diagonally in this direction, so I can come out, land about there, and then turn to face all the way across the table, or even turn to face like this way. So if the enemy don't advance, I could then maybe take another move and swoop and land down there, and then still have a turn to look that way. 1 pivot remaining. So even though you're a big flyer and you're nimble, you often will want to move out the double, so you want to be thinking the turn before about where you want to be next turn, because that way you'll be lined up correctly, so you don't have to use your initial pivot to turn to reach the spot. You'll already be facing the right way that you want to go. So that's a good tell, actually. If you want to know where someone's big flyer might be going, which way is it looking? And if you can either block that area or make it unfavourable for them to land there, then you're going to make sure that they have to use their pivot to land somewhere else, which means they don't then have the pivot to turn and look at you. I hope all that made sense to people. Mr. Hawley says, the buns were absolutely delicious. Obsidian Platinum Lifetime Membership. Standard. Yes. So, if I ever set up any kind of gaming shop or venue or gaming retail outlet, I would definitely consider creating a Platinum Obsidian Lifetime Membership card and then not invalidating it. And I think that the bad publicity caused by me personally calling them out on 2 minor YouTube videos, surely that should be enough for them to change their rogue ways. Okay, cinematic shot over the grotesques into the enemy. There we go. Look at all this. There's Whip, there's the Spellcaster, there's the War Drum. They're a very nicely painted army with some serious tuft action going on. All the speed on this side. Turn 1 goes to me, so that's a big deal. Gargoyles, get on the objectives. Everyone else, move up. On this side, the Grotesque Champion has put itself within charge range of the Crudger on Winged Slasher, but I don't think anyone in their right mind would take that bait, because it would get munched. Over here, Gargoyles have pulled off the grab the token manoeuvre, so my other units are going to be advancing up, and then they're going to start going this way diagonally, if they live. The other unit's done the same thing. I've got them lined up, so they're not going to hit the woods. If they don't want to, they can just go this way. So, everyone else advance, cover the Gargoyles as they walk away as fast as possible from the enemy. If one of them gets lightning bolted, I've got this unit as backup to go and pick it up as well. Turn 1 for the enemy is coming up, so I'm not really in charge range of too much. You can see that I'm being quite aggressive on this side, and I don't feel there's much to worry about at this stage. I've got my big flyer in a really dangerous position. The charge range for this thing is 22 inches, so all these units, they have to be very careful if they advance, not leave spaces. Turn 1 for the Orcs, so the Orklings move out in front, and it's still very congested. It's not a huge advance, and I think the Orcs are concerned that my Gargoyles have picked up both the tokens. Whip has moved backwards to not be charged by my half-breed champion, which is a good move, because that would have been my #1 target to get rid of the lightning bolt, because that's the big threat now. Because if we just end up in a big war of attrition in the middle, the Gargoyles are going to walk away, and you'll never catch them. So Whip with the lightning bolt is one of the only things capable of actually dealing with them right now. So, 2 wounds from the lightning bolt. Not enough on the nerve to waver them, so the Gargoyles are fine. They're going to be able to advance away with the objective for a turn. Turn 2 for me. So you can see there has been an advance, but not a vast one, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. Turn 2. Gargoyles, I decide actually, I had them lined up to walk onto the hill, but I don't want to be on the hill. I'm going to now try and block Whip's line of sight, because he's the only thing that can threaten me. I'm just going to go a bit slower, but work my way round the hill instead, so I'm not presenting him with a target. And then I'm going to park things in a position that block his line of sight specifically as well. So I abandon this area, so this big phalanx unit is not an issue. I charge the Grotesque Champion and my half-breeds and a half-breed champion into the small phalanx unit. And I know I said I was going to avoid them, but I'm actually cool with this because it's the smaller of the units, and the game plan now is not so much kill everything, because there's so much phalanx, I'm not confident I'll kill all these units. I just want to get away with the objectives and block Whip's line of sight. So I've thrown loads of units in here, I've parked my big flyer there, dropped the Gargoyles in so this unit can't hit anyone significant at the moment. And if you look at this, you'll see that this unit of chariots is moving up. They're making sure that they can look at the Grotesque Champion. I'm not sure whether they're staying out of his line of sight. Or actually, I was making sure I was out of his line of sight initially, which is why the Grotesque Champion has this position there. So you can see, not in the line of sight of that unit. And then in the enemy turn, when they move up, they're going to make sure that they're not in the Grotesque Champion's line of sight. So, what do the Orcs do about this? Because this isn't looking great for them scenario-wise. I'm running away with 2 of the objectives and Whip can't see anything. So if you were Whip in this situation, would you start running around this way perhaps? Because then the gargoyles could always turn away and start shuffling in this direction, but that leads them towards your chariots and the Crudger perhaps. Or would you just give up on that and try and crunch through and use Whip to support? What would you do with Whip in this situation, is my question. Because he's the only hope if the gargoyles are going over here. Turn 2 for the orcs. So, now, when I was setting up, I was aware there was a risk that something like this could happen if I didn't kill this unit. I thought I might kill them, because the unit that I charged in the front with was elite, and there's a grotesque champion, and one in the flank wasn't worrying about their phalanx. So I thought I might kill that unit, but I didn't roll high enough to kill them, which has left this interesting conundrum open. So the Orklings charge the gargoyles. I don't necessarily expect Orklings to kill gargoyles in one hit, but they might. If they do, and then they overrun more than an inch, or more than 2 inches maybe, that might put them behind the line of this unit, which would then mean that this big orc horde could potentially overrun through this guy and hit them, because at the moment it's obviously too congested. So, I'm a little bit concerned about this as a possibility, that there could be an overrun going on here if this unit fights first and overruns. But I don't know whether they physically could make it far enough, because there's this guy here. So maybe they could. It's not 100% clear to me. The big flyer gives up on that flank and decides, you know what, we need speed over on this side now. This flank's irrelevant. There's one objective here. The gargoyles are running away with 2 objectives. We need to support this fight, kill everything, and then start chasing those gargoyles down as fast as possible. And the war drum on a chariot picks up an objective there, with the other chariots looking around, supporting, and you can see the arc of sight has been put down there, so they are not in the grotesque champion's line of sight. But I've got 2 really hard-hitting units here, but I'm not going to be able to hit everything I want. The flank of this unit is covered by these 2 units, and I'm in the front of that unit. But I'm going to be able to hit some things. This unit could charge the flank of the war drum and kill it, but you'll see in a minute why I choose not to do that, and I'll go over that shortly. So, let's see what happens as a result of all the combat. I put my little damage markers down. The half-breeds here take 7 damage from the Long Axe Regiment. Do not die. The Orklings kill the gargoyles, and they choose not to overrun. So, I don't know whether my opponent was just eyeballing it and thought that they were going to hit one of my units and still block the overrun from the Long Axe Horde into the half-breeds, or whether he had something else in mind. I'm sure my opponent will watch this video at some stage and let me know what was the thought process behind not overrunning with the Orklings here. But I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought they were going to overrun. I thought maybe they could make it far enough to allow the Long Axe to then reach the half-breeds on an overrun if they kill the champion, which is not a guarantee. But it's a lot of dice rolls that you have to succeed with, but I think that was a possible path. Looking at it, I think maybe they hit the Ghoulie grabber, so it's just a question of whether they stick out far enough above the half-breeds or whether they're behind them when they land. I can't tell exactly from this photo. But the half-breed champion does get killed, and these guys then decide we're going to stay where we are as well. I don't know whether it's a case of not wanting to give up certain flanks with certain units. It's possible, and what it could be, you know. So this flyer landed here, and specifically landed in this position so that this unit was covering it, so my flyer can't charge it. So it's got me in the front, we established that, but I can see it. So, if they were to overrun at all, then it would allow my flyer to charge the enemy flyer. So this could be the entire reasoning actually here. This could be 100% it. It could be, because if I get the first hit in this flyer versus flyer battle, I probably win. And then this is the most likely thing that's going to be able to chase down gargoyles in my opponent's mind, I think. So that's probably why they don't want to overrun, because they look at this and think, if I get my flyer killed, it doesn't matter what the infantry are doing, because they're not going to catch the gargoyles anyway, and I'm still going to lose. So maybe this was the strategy here. But let me know if you would have done this differently. Would you have set up this whole situation in any way differently? So, for example, would you have put the Crudger behind something else rather than this unit, if that's what was preventing them from trying to overrun? and where would you have put this Crudger, because it doesn't want to be involved in this fight. So maybe on the hill behind the chariots, and making sure that you have your facing that I can't hit, facing my flyer, perhaps. This unit of Morax is going over to that side, and to provide some support over there because they're too congested behind all this mess. So they obviously realise we want to have a fight, we want to go over there. But what I spotted is that my flyer can probably see them. There's probably enough of a gap there that my big giant charge speed 22 flyer can probably see that regiment of Morax and is probably in range. So that would be a nice rear charge with 27 attacks on 3s with crushing strength 3. That's very tempting for me, and it would put me in a very good position with regards to the rest of the Orc lines as well. When you've got a big flyer, you want to fly behind enemy lines, but often doing that means that you're then facing the wrong way for a turn. But if you find something to charge behind enemy lines, and you manage to kill it, then you obviously get the free rotate at the end of it. So you get kind of the free pivot. So if you allow something to be killed behind your lines and you allow a big flyer to then take the opportunity to spin round, then suddenly there is a huge area that's under threat from this very tall flyer that's way taller than a hill. And it would be bad news for the Orcs. So that's what I'm going to immediately get the laser out and check as soon as my turn starts. So turn 3. I put the Grotesque Champion just towing into the woods because it can't charge because it's not in the line of sight. I put my Grotesques into the front of the chariots and do not do that much damage actually, which is sad. And they are potentially open to being flanked by those chariots now. But of course they won't have their Thunderous Charge, but that's still obviously a threat. But I'm less concerned about this flank anyway. My big flyer does get in and kills the Morax regiment. And the important thing about this position as well is that the enemy flyer is about 1 inch away from me. My flyer is 2 inches faster than the enemy flyer. That means if the enemy flyer starts flapping away, directly away from me, I can still catch it and recharge it. So, interesting situation. Having a slightly faster flyer than the enemy is looking like a significant advantage here. Then, I do finish off the Long Axe Regiment there, and then back up, position my units a little bit afterwards. The Immortal Guard are providing backup in this direction, making sure they're not going to be flanked by a big flyer. Maybe these guys could be, potentially, but if they do, they're going to get hit. It's going to get hit by Grotesques off a hill, and probably Immortal Guard at the same time, which should be enough to kill it. This Long Axe horde over here, those ones in the corner are dead. This one is still kind of out the game, and my gargoyles are still escaping. One of them has gone all the way down here. This one is still in the woods, but out of the line of sight of the lightning bolt, which is there. And the fast stuff of the enemy is still stuck in this corner, so my gargoyles are getting away with the objectives quite freely at the moment. You can see that the Ghoulie Grabber does not kill the Orclings, so they're providing congestion now for the Orcs, which is not great for them. Then, into the enemy turn. The big horde, big phalanx horde starts moving up again. Now, the enemy flyer decides, actually, because as it was moving, I then reminded my opponent, do you remember that my flyer has actually got the Brew of Haste, so it can fly 22, and if you land there, I could actually charge you. And my opponent then obviously reconsidered, but did decide in the end to go for that move, and decided, actually, if I don't go for it, I just have to hope I can survive the rear charge from the enemy flyer, and if I do, then I get to charge the gargoyles, because even if I stop it flying, I wouldn't reduce its movement speed, so it would still be able to get them. So I've got one chance to kill that flyer with a rear charge, and my opponent decides that that is the play. The other units around here are a little bit stuck, because there's Orclings, this Morax unit hits the Grotesque Champion, and this unit is closing in, but they're not getting any closer to the gargoyles, and it's looking good for me. Up here, let's see, so a bit of damage dished out there. Some damage done to the Grotesque Champ on this flank. So, my opponent, I'm not sure, because I didn't actually spot it at the time. I spotted it after the combat happened, that actually they were technically in the flank. So had they declared a fresh charge, then they would have been in the flank, but then of course they would have been hindered, but then they have the Jesse's Boots of Striding, so they could have used those. So maybe they could have got a flank in here. As it stands, they do waver the Grotesques. And at this point, I did spot it, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make my opponent feel bad in the middle of the game. And then when I actually countercharge them, then that's also in the front anyway, because it has to be, because it's a countercharge. Because I think I technically, if I hadn't been wavered and could have done a fresh charge, then I think I could have potentially got the flank in there as well. But I didn't mention it during the game, but my opponent, who I'm sure is going to watch this video, will look at this and think, yes, maybe I could have declared a fresh flank charge there and used the boots and killed this unit. The War Drum does 1 damage there. So it's looking good scenario-wise. Kill-wise, it could be about to look very good. Let's find out. So turn 3 for me. Oh no, turn 4. So this flank has fallen a bit. The War Drum's dead. The Chariots are dead after the Grotesques countercharged into them and killed them and regenerated loads of wounds as well. The Grotesque Champ charged into the flank of the Chariots on the hill. So that's a waver. So that stops them charging off. Let's look at what they were looking at. So they were covering this area. So if my flyer hit the enemy flyer, they would then hit my flyer and then start chasing the gargoyles if they killed it. But now they're wavered because the Grotesque Champ in the flank. So they can't assist. So it's all falling apart for the Orcs at the moment. The Ghoulie Grabber wavers the Orclings, which is the best result possible for me because they're now totally stuck in front of this big phalanx horde that haven't really participated in the game yet, which was the goal, obviously. And even though I've been lacking a lot of the control units that I usually have, I feel like because of the makeup of the Orc army with these massive units, I have actually been able to block them in quite effectively. I actually totally forget to move my Grotesques this turn, by the way, which is why they're still in charge range of this horde. It's not an intentional move. I meant to just send them over this way and get them to fight the Immortal Guard, but I just forgot to move them. My flyer did come in and murder the enemy flyer, and then because this chariot unit isn't a threat anymore, I then turn around to face these 3 units instead, who are bigger threats right now, because that chariot unit is going to be finished off next turn. Gargoyles are continuing to run away into the corners, and it's looking very healthy. This unit is still blocked in. Turn 4 for the Orcs. And, by the way, if anyone has any thoughts, feel free to drop them into the chat as we're going along. I know everyone's probably making furious tactical notes about how to improve their Kings of War game because of my tactical mastery. So, who was fighting them? The Grotesque Champion there gets killed by the Morax Regiment. The Long Axe Horde, which I foolishly forgot to move the Grotesques out of the way so they get charged. And they don't die though, so we can live with that. And then my turn 5. So, the half-breeds charge back into the Crudger on the Gore. The Big Dragon, the Ghoulie Grabber, the half-breeds, and the Grotesque Champion all charge into the Long Axe Horde to try and take them out in one fell swoop, but obviously some of them are going to be -1 to hit because hitting the phalanx in the front. And because of that, don't actually kill them in one round. Grotesques hit back from there, and I turn around the Immortal Guard a bit as well to face them, so that potentially, if it keeps going, they can charge them as well. Gargoyles still running away. And you can see that these half-breeds have stolen the token from the chariot over there as well, and the enemy aren't going to get any scoring units over here, so it's looking very bad for the Orcs right now. Turn 5 for the Orcs. The Crudger just moves away a bit because it was wavered, but it's not going to help its cause too much. And so, the Morax unit, let me know if this was played correctly. Let me go back and show you. So this is, hold on, do I even have a good shot of this? Okay, that's where they ended up. They are on the flank of the half-breeds, quite clearly, but they can't position themselves there because they can't complete a legal charge because this building's in the way. So, my understanding is that they can't charge the front either because they're not in the front. And it's not an overrun or a surge, which would mean that if you hit a unit flush to a section, flush to a facing that you're not in, you still align to that facing. But because it's a normal charge, my understanding is they can't complete a charge here. Because you can complete a charge and end up down here, but you're not touching the initial point of contact, which is this corner, and this building prevents them from doing it. So my understanding is that they can't complete that charge, so they back up instead, so they'd now be in the front, so next time they'd be able to complete a charge. And there's a counter charge into the Ghoulie grabber, so if he dies they could then overrun into one of the other units, because he's an individual. The Orklings have gone into the flank of the half-breeds as well. The Grotesques on the hill are killed by the Long Axe Horde, and then they turn round to face the Immortal Guard, rather than chasing down the Gargoyles and getting rear-charged by Immortal Guard, which would end very badly for them. Damage done by the Orklings, the Ghoulie grabber gets killed, and then they kill my big flyer as well, the Long Axe Horde, so they do a good job there, but they're still kind of penned in and they're still going to die. Okay, but they're picking up kill points now. Into my turn 6, Gargoyles still running away, half-breeds finish off the Crudger, the big horde goes down this time, and hold on, who was there? The Orklings got countercharged as well, so they got killed also. So lots of kills, and the Immortal Guard do not manage to kill the big horde there in one go, because even though it was damaged. And then Orc turn 6. Morax waver the half-breeds, which is fine because they have Fury, and the Immortal Guard survive a round against the big Phalanx Horde. And all my other units get charged by something and take a bit of damage. Then, okay, what fiendish plot have I got in mind here? At the moment, the Grotesque Champion, despite being nimble, cannot fit through this gap to get into the flank of the Morax. The only way to do that is to move backwards with the Grotesques. And this Morax unit is worth way more than this War Drum, so I want to have 2 units hitting it. I want to have these guys charging into the flank of the Long Axe Horde, helping out the Immortal Guard, so I'd definitely kill them. I want him to help out here, so the Grotesques are just going to have to back up. So they go backwards, leaving a space for the Grotesque Champion to nimble charge through that gap and crunch the Morax regiment with the assistance of this unit of half-breeds who are wavered. So, turn 7, we do get one. Crunch the Horde. I had to drop the token to do this, by the way, because otherwise they would have been too slow, because they're all the way over here. So, because this tournament doesn't give you any bonus points per victory point, it's purely winning that you score for, I didn't need to hold 3. So I was quite happy to drop this one to get more kill points. So, dropped it, made that charge, killed the Morax. Happy times. So the enemy have only got 1 scoring unit left alive now. Everything else is just an individual. Turn 7 for the Orcs. Don't manage to kill anything, and that's the end of the game. So I think that's probably a good informative game for people to look at, I would say. Interesting tactics on loot and lessons to be taken from that. If you've got enemies who are setting up looking directly at a token with a fast unit that can jump on it in turn 1, do you have a counter to that, and where is that counter? Is it nearby? Are you relying on something that's not that reliable to do the job? Lightning Bolt 3 was a bit risky in that situation. On average, Lightning Bolt 3 I don't think kills a unit of Gargoyles. So you'd ideally want a bit more than that. And lots of units were positioned in such a way that they were getting chaffed up by each other as well. The Orklings surviving so long blocked up the big scary unit of Long Axe, because you saw what the Long Axe Horde did to the Grotesques. So that other unit that just didn't get to fight for the whole game, the one that did kill the Grotesques only really got to fight because I just forgot to move the Grotesques as well, so they should have been stuck fighting the Immortal Guard if I'd not forgotten to move them. So I think the Orc Hordes need to be unobstructed. I think when you've got that phalanx, I would have to commit so many units into them that probably still wouldn't kill them. Even if I go in with 3 units at once in the front, you may well survive that still. And you've got hard-hitting units behind, you've got the Morax, you've got the chariots that you can set up to countercharge if I don't kill the one big horde, and I'd be committing a lot into that one horde, so you've got a lot to hit me back with still. So I think maybe you don't need to put chaff in front of the phalanx when you're facing an all-cavalry army, perhaps. Because the big horde that was obviously very scary at fighting, not just defensively, ended up not being able to do much for the whole game. because of those Orklings in front of them. Also, setting up next to this building was awkward. It was just something for me to use to block them in more and more easily. So, lots of things to look at, I think, in this game. Do you like to jump straight onto objectives and walk away with them, or do you like to just win the fight and then worry about the objectives later? Sometimes I'll do that. I felt in this game, because there was only that lightning bolt and all the fast enemy units were way down the other end, I thought it was a good opportunity to grab them and walk away, which ended up being correct, and then I really just was avoiding a fight with the phalanx units for the whole game, and that worked. The terrain definitely helped. So let me know your thoughts on that game, because I think that's quite an interesting educational tool, that one. There's a lot of interesting things going on there. Next game. The League of Rordia. So, there are 2 hordes of Dogs of War. What's this? More phalanx. So, the fact that there's so much phalanx around at the moment means that I'm going to, after this event, regardless of how these games went, there's just so much of it that I think I need to change up my Abyssal Dwarf list a bit and not have all cavalry and flyers. Or do some runs with the Night Stalkers for a bit. Because the meta just seems to have a lot of phalanx and a fair bit of ensnare, but mostly phalanx at the moment. It's finally good. Phalanx used to not be that great, so people just didn't take it. So obviously cavalry was everywhere, but now phalanx was improved. So I think cavalry, all cavalry armies are not necessarily the way to go right now. Unless you have some way of staying away from the phalanx. Like against that orc army, because the rest of all the fast stuff in the army wasn't really close to them to support, I was able to avoid them mostly. But you have to base an entire game plan around avoiding 3 units. And ideally you don't want to be doing that, you want to be able to fight all of the enemy's army. And having potentially an entire army that you just can't fight or don't want to is not ideal. So I think I'm going to mix up my list a bit just because of the way the meta's going at the moment. So, more phalanx hordes. And one of them has ensnare as well. One of them is elite. So one of them slightly better at fighting, one of them slightly better at surviving. And the surviving one also has a higher defense, but has a worse melee stat as well. So the League of Rordia have changed a little bit since I won the League of Rordia UK Best in Faction 2018-19 award. Obviously halflings have fled from the Rordian lands. Some things remain pretty much the same. Volley guns, battle shrine, still pretty good. So 2 units of knights, one with boots of striding, one with blade of slashing, which are just kind of standard upgrades that you see a lot. 2 mounted scout troops, honor guard, which is still pretty tasty by the looks of it, with Brew of Sharpness, so 18 attacks hitting on 2s, with Crush 1, Thunderous 2, Speed 7. I remember these guys, I've played against lists in the past where people gave Honor Guard hordes the Nimble item back in the day. I don't even know if that still exists. I suspect it doesn't. 2 volley guns, Battle Shrine, which still has some nice lightning bolt and rallying capabilities, but not too high a cost. It actually reminds me a little bit of the Night Stalker's Portal of Despair. Not in its role, it doesn't really have any of the same rules, but it's cheap, you can only take one of them, and it's just very good in what it does. It does something that the rest of the army potentially can't. So the Battle Shrine, it's giving you some nice, really tall lightning bolt, and some rallying, and it's just an inexpensive, tough to shift unit with a small base, because it's chariot size. And the Portal of Despair for the Night Stalkers is even cheaper, I think. So that's very cheap, and it gives out Inspiring, but other than that, it's just a nice cheap roadblock that you can only have one of, because otherwise they would be spammed, because for their points, they're too survivable. But it's fine because you can only take one. So that's why I draw the comparison between those 2 units here. We've got a Baron, who is a hero just on foot. And then we've got the Army Standard Bearer with Loot of Insatiable Darkness for some Bane chance, which is always a concern, obviously. Life Leech Aura for some weird reason. I don't know why the humans in the League of Rordia leech the life of their opponents because they're near a Standard Bearer. I don't know what the fluff reason is for that. But Life Leech seems like more of a vampire sort of ability. Maybe the League of Rawdia is slowly being infested by vampirism. There's a wizard on a Pegasus and another wizard on a Pegasus. One of them with Lightning Bolt 5, so we've got some more Lightning Bolt, not quite as tall as the Battle Shrine, but with a bit more speed. Then we've got one of them that has Hex 3 and Alchemist Curse. So Hex is obviously useless against my army because I've got no spells, but Alchemist Curse, always pretty tasty spell. And then we've got a Duke, who is a large cavalry Duke, who has Crushing Strength, Iron Resolve, Nimble, Rallying, Thunderous Charge, and Very Inspiring. So it's not the flying version of this. And more units than me, unit strength is about the same. So this scenario is Control. And we've got round about the same number of scoring units, roughly, I think. At a glance, looks about the same. My opponent won the roll-off to choose sides and chose this side because there are hills there. And I was thinking, well, you're deploying your volley guns right behind the hill. If I go first, that's great. But if they go first, then they can walk straight onto the hill. And suddenly they've got a good view of the battlefield. So I can understand choosing that side. Because I could hide behind those hills and they wouldn't be able to walk up there and see me. And with Control, you don't necessarily have to advance at the start of the game, because I've got units that are very good for pouncing on things, like the gargoyles. The reason I've set them up so far back is because there's several instances of medium range shooting in the opposing army. There's lightning bolts, there's volley guns. I don't want them to be killed in turn 1. And I have to make a choice with gargoyles now. Do I keep them hidden for the entire game? Because as soon as they pop out, they die instantly. So they're just drawing enemy fire for a turn. Is that what I want to use them for? Or do I want to use them in the more aggressive role of throwing them in front of the enemy to block them up to buy me a turn of advancing on them so I can have a higher chance of winning the fight? That's a tough decision. Because if I use them in that role and they die immediately, I might be drastically reducing my chances of winning the scenario. If I hide them, I might be drastically reducing my chances of winning the fight. I don't know what the right balance is there. With 3 units of gargoyles, would you maybe use 2 as chaff and hide 1? Would you hide 2? Would you hide all of them? Would you throw all of them in as chaff and just try and win the fight and then go from there? And risk not having enough scoring units left at the end? It's a tough dilemma, and it's not a dilemma that I would have had if I was running my Clash of Kings list, because I would have hidden, let's say, 2 gargoyles, used 2 as chaff, or maybe just 1 as chaff, hid 3, and then threw out all my half-breed champions as chaff. But in this list, I do not have that luxury. So I've got to be careful here, and I actually decide that I'm going to hide them in this game, because looking at the enemy, I want to avoid a fight as much as possible. So blocking them up so I can advance doesn't seem that great of an idea. I would just rather not fight any of the big phalanx hordes. We've got Christian in the chat who made it to a live broadcast. Congratulations. You should be very proud of yourself. So, there's barely anything in the middle. I don't want to be volley gunned to death, so I don't really want to advance too much on that position if they end up getting onto the hill. I have put most of my stuff out on this flank and on this flank. And with Control, as long, you don't have to be dead in the centre of the table, but these are the 2 areas that are going to score the most. So as long as you're contesting these lines here, which I've described in Control before, if you're holding this area, then you're able to strike into all 4 of these sections. If you're holding this little area here, you're able to strike out into these 4. So you don't need to be smack in the centre of an area to score it. You can be mostly trying to fight like here. And the Immortal Guard is staying in my central home area because they're unit strength 4, which is very high, and an enemy units coming in here might struggle to top that. Death by a Dragon says, Double Hill is a strong position for a volley gun list. It certainly is, so I'm very eager to go first here, because what I want to do is push this guy up behind the hill. And the enemy units that can see over the hill include the Honor Guard, I think, and the Battle Shrine and the Pegasus Wizards, who are terrible at fighting, and this guy who's all the way out here. So if the Honor Guard wanted to charge me, then I would be able to set up and have units ready to hit them. And they're quite a significant unit. So I would accept that. Trading this guy for a unit of Honor Guard. And yeah, so if I go first, I could get him right here. Hide some of the gargoyles, push up and get ready to strike at anyone that kills him. And go from there. And push these guys up onto the flank. So if the other units want to come in and deal with me, then we're looking into their flank all of a sudden, and we can eat them that way. If I don't go first, it's a bit dicier. So let's just find out anyway. On this flank, we've got the Grotesque Champion. We've got the 2 half-breed regiments being deployed together. Over here, we've got the Gargoyles, who I've positioned just out of range of any of the enemy shooting in turn 1, even if they get turn 1 and move forwards. And I've got my big flyer out on this side, and a Grotesque Horde, and a Grotesque Champ. So I want to try and sweep this flank, really. If you look back at these 2 units, there's no point hitting them in the front. They've got Phalanx, one of them's got Ensnare. They're really good. And it's just going to be walking into a wall of death and then getting flanked by Knights. So just avoid this area entirely, come in through the flank instead. Even if they turn to face me, and I have to hit them head on this sort of line, they don't then have the flank support of Knights. So that's the plan. Oh, cinematic over-the-shoulder grotesque shot there. So here's the enemy. There's the light cavalry is behind the Honor Guard there. And now this army is obviously a bit of a mishmash of models. The ones that I assume are intended for long-term use in the army. Probably these guys. I think this is the first time my opponent was running Rordia. So I assume the High Elves probably aren't long-term. These guys probably are. I'm looking for the consistent basing, you see. So most of them are pretty consistent. There are these High Elf models as well. Looks like it. So turn 1 does not go to me, unfortunately. So volley guns straight onto the hill. And the other units advancing up as well. Pegasus Wizard comes up as fast as possible. So now, because I don't get the first turn, oh, you can see a best sporting player bit of paper that was being handed out by the TO there. Polluting the photo. So, suddenly, I'm not actually feeling too bad about this, because this army is so compact, I will have the opportunity to set something up on the flanks. I have to be wary of staying out of the charge arc of the Honor Guard. Other than that, there's a couple of individuals. There's the Ghoulie grabber around here as well, and there is just a regular Duke, who's okay, but he's only an infantry hero. So, I could maybe get something going on the flank here, because this is a solid enemy line, but it's now halfway across the table. So, there's nothing really protecting this line too well. Advancing down the middle was never an option anyway. I'm now not too eager to be pushing out of cover with these guys, though, because the volley guns are going to have a field day from now on. And this guy, I'm going to be super aggressive with him, because if he, unless he gets killed by lightning bolt, I mean, let's find out. No, he doesn't. He only takes 1 damage. So, I'm going to push him right into this spot here. I don't think either of these big phalanx ensnare hordes would try to hit him in the flank. That would be probably a bad idea, because you're risking opening up your flank to my cavalry then, which sounds terrible because you're relying on phalanx, so that just seems unnecessary. So you're going to have to deal with him somehow, otherwise he's just going to start eating your war machines. So you're going to shoot everything you've got at him. The war machines are going to be hitting him on 6s because he's an individual, so you're probably going to want to divert some lightning bolt into him as well. You've got several sources, you've got the battle shrine, so if you shoot everything you've got at him and kill him, I can live with that, because that buys me a turn of not being shot up by anything else, or onto anything of my units. So let's see what I do here. Into the flank, we've got my big flyer. Now, this is a risk. My risk is that if these individuals here wound me, then obviously I can't fly. But my thinking is that I could possibly munch through both of them in 1 turn anyway. So it's not strictly a trap, but I think I could kill them both. Potentially in a round. Maybe 2 rounds at worst, I think I could kill both of them. If I pick the one with the higher nerve to go for first, which is the Ghoulie grabber, I think I kill him in 2 rounds. I might kill this guy in 1. So I could potentially deal with both of them in 2 rounds. And I can live with that. So it kind of gets rid of them, hopefully. And I don't think the enemy are going to commit too much in this direction, because I've got the kind of a grotesque sandwich going on here as well. So anything that just is sat camped here waiting for the outcome of this fight is going to get hit in multiple directions by grotesques. I don't think they want to be too eager to be fighting me over here. I've also been hiding my gargoyles behind all this terrain as well now. So you can see him, if he doesn't die, he's going to hit a war machine and kill it. So you've got to deal with him. And over on this side with the knights, I'm not advancing here because I want to stay in the terrain. I've advanced up with my grotesque champion, and I've made sure that the enemy cannot double charge me with this unit and this unit, or with this unit and this unit, because I want knights to be on this side. So I want this guy and this unit to be the only double charge option. So if they go in, the knights are going to be sticking out to about here, which means I'm going to be able to flank charge them with my unit that has the boots of striding there. So we'll see if they go for it, because if they don't kill him, they're probably toast. And I don't think this guy's base is going to be big enough to block up their flank to prevent me hitting them. This unit of knights, if they were going to hit him, they have to do it on their own. And there's a good chance that's not enough to kill him. And if you don't kill him, suddenly they're going to get hit. And if everyone else is moving up purely to block, then they both get hit by half-breed regiments in the front. And if you take the first hit from them, that's bad news. So I quite like this as a setup, using the edge of the table to dictate which units can hit you and which can't. Turn 2. So you can see I've made my opponent think now. So setting up various bases to see how it would look. And we determine that actually the light cavalry unit, because they'd be moving out the double and can't go into the woods, they can't quite reach enough to cover this, which means that the half-breeds would actually be able to hit the flank of that unit if it goes to plan and this guy doesn't die. So my opponent decides to go for that anyway and just gambles on killing this guy in one go. If you don't kill him though, suddenly this is bad times. Because he's going to be able to countercharge your hero on the big bear there, and then these two. This unit would probably just go backwards actually and be in reserve, and then this unit would hit the flank of the knights and almost certainly kill them. Okay, you can see over here that this unit has moved forwards a bit. They're all making way so that the lightning bolt and the volley guns can start targeting my hero. He doesn't die. Bad times. Then what's going to happen on this side? Both the individuals charge into the overmaster. So like I said, it's kind of bait, but it's, in order for it to be successful bait, the enemy has to get something out of it. So my opponent is going to be happy to shut down my flyer. I'm going to be happy because I've got a chance to gobble up both these individuals in one go. Probably over 2 turns though, most likely. And then be in a position to strike at the flank of the opposing army. And because there's 2 of them there, my opponent will maybe be confident I'm not going to one-round them and maybe won't put anything as backup immediately. But we'll see, because they should be scared of the grotesques. You can see that the Honour Guard have charged the Ghoulie Grabber, and these guys, which are the light cavalry, have moved into this position. So what they're doing, 2 things potentially. They are, I don't know if it would have lined up correctly anyway, but possibly what could have ended up happening is if these guys kill the Ghoulie Grabber, depending on the precise angle they want to position themselves at, it's possible that they could have given this guy the possibility to still see them and kind of turn 90 degrees and charge them down this line. That's a theoretical possibility, which is now no longer the case because of this unit. They're also blocking the grotesques and the grotesque champion from getting through. The champion could actually fit through that gap, but isn't going to have enough pivots to then hit anything else, particularly in the facing that he's likely to be in. So that's not going to be an option. So they're kind of blocking me in. But I'm okay with this actually, because my grotesques might take Honour Guard in 1 round. It's very possible they could do that. Okay. So I quite like this. Not necessarily, I don't think I'm just going to steamroll the enemy. But I like the interesting setup that we've got going on. We've got a lot of different things presented to each other here. It's very strategic. So, I'm avoiding the phalanx units so far. Let's see if all this shooting is enough to kill him. So from the first bit of shooting, I think from the volley guns he takes 6. Takes a bit more from the lightning bolt, and he dies. Okay. So all the enemy shooting. We've got G-dubs in the chat. Sorry I missed it, but is your Titan Flyer an Overlord? It is an Overlord, and not... Overmaster. That's the one. So the reason... Oh, you retracted the message. You must have heard me refer to him as an Overmaster then. So, the reason it's the Overmaster is because his purpose in the list is to have the Brew of Haste and have a charge threat range of 22 inches, and I don't think the Spellcaster carries quite the same threat, even though he possibly synergizes more with this list than the Overmaster does. But he's not in the list for a support role, he's in here to be a long-range threat piece. And to have the unit strength as well. That's the reason I've put him in instead of a lot of my individuals. So he suffers 2 damage, so he does just about take damage. If he wasn't damaged, what would have happened here? So, he could have just flank charged this big phalanx horde, and that would have been a nightmare scenario for them, because I could have also possibly joined in with this grotesque horde, who I normally wouldn't want to charge into a phalanx horde, but supporting a flank charge from him could be good. He could also flank charge the Honor Guard, which would mean their certain doom. So the fact that he's taken 2 damage and now can't fly, which was razor close, by the way. I think the first unit that attacked did nothing, and then the second one just about got those 2 damage in. Okay, so my Ghoulie grabber gets killed by the Honor Guard, who then turn round a bit into a position where I'm going to be hitting them in the front. The Grotesque Champion does get killed, but it wasn't that much of a guarantee. He took 13 damage, so a bad roll on either of those nerve rolls would have left him alive there, and that would have been horrifically bad for the League of Rordia there. So because of that, the Knights go back up. So they're protecting their flank. And I have to decide whether I want to hit them now. It's not going to be optimal. I can hit this unit in the flank, I can hit that unit in the front. I could take out both in one go. And the reason I might want to do that is because the longer I delay at this point, the more chance of me just being shot to pieces by all the lightning bolt and the volley guns. So I might well want to get stuck in now. So, my turn 2. Gargoyles are just moving around, hiding around the back of the table still, because I may well need them to score the scenario. I decide to throw these half-breeds into the front of the Knights. 7 damage, which is a disappointing outcome there. I would have hoped to get a bit more than that, because these ones were elite, but then again, they were making a hindered charge. The other ones do... Hold on. So, what I spotted is that, if we look here, this guy is in range of my half-breeds. And because I can just about fit through to charge him, we determine, because of the angles involved, then what's going to happen is I can charge him and then overrun into the Pegasus. Wow, wow, wow. So, I line them up, we get the old lasers out to make sure I can actually pull it off, and there we go. Killed the individual, who was inspiring as well, the standard bearer, overrun into the Pegasus, killed the Pegasus, so we're 1 wizard down and out of the charge arc of the Knights. So I think that was a nice move, but obviously my opponent won't be feeling that way. My opponent will be feeling like, why did I leave that individual in that position? And over here, we've got the Grotesques into the Honor Guard. Disappointing, only 7 damage. The other Grotesques kill the light cavalry that were there to provide a blockage and then overrun as far as they can to make sure neither of these individuals just move to stand in front of me. My Overmaster puts 6 wounds onto the Ghoulie grabber, so phase 1 of the plan is going okay. That's enough, so I should be able to kill both of them in one go next turn if they're still there, and then I'm free after that to go off and fly and kill other things. And that's assuming they damage me next turn as well, which they might not. The Grotesque Champion has moved up into the woods, so he's got a bit of a line of sight there, but he's going to spend another turn setting up probably and get to about there, and then start threatening charges. Gargoyles still making their way round, so the safest position on the table so they don't get killed. 1 is now all the way up there. So looking where they can strike at the end of the game, and what is likely to die here. This unit, not very likely to die. They can only really be hit by some lightning bolt this turn. This unit may well die as a result of not doing too much to that cavalry unit, so they may get flanked by this character. The Grotesques should survive one round against the Honor Guard, who have lost all their Thunderous Charge, which they do rely on a bit, similar to the Grotesques in that way. They have, I think they're Crush 1, Thunderous 2, which is the same. So you really want to get the first hit in those circumstances. Turn 3 for the League of Rordia. So these guys countercharge there. The big phalanx, one of the big phalanx hordes, I think this is the ensnare horde, and this one's not. So this is the, or is it the other way around? One of them's ensnaring, one of them fights better, but I can't remember which is which now. But one of them has gone into the Immortal Guard. The Pegasus is going to start lightning bolting my half-breeds. Then the volley guns spend the turn turning round because there's nothing really to shoot at now because everyone's in combat. The Honor Guard are fighting the Grotesques again, or they will be momentarily. The light cavalry go into the flank of the half-breeds there, and this character, in a move that surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have done too much, decides, actually, that might be enough to kill them, so I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to nimble charge around here and hit that unit. I think these knights had to take some evasive action to make space for it to happen. So they're now providing backup, and now I can't then charge the back of any knights. I have to fight this guy, which I can live with. So really that move that's taken out a standard bearer and a Pegasus has also got this guy away from charging my unit in the flank. So I'm quite happy with that outcome. But of course that is a nice move as well, to block them in now. Okay, let's see. Honor Guard into the Grotesques. So you can see they've been squared up. Now you can see laser action on the table. How exciting is that? You can see that we're checking out some lines of sight and some arcs. So let's see if some damage is done. The wizard actually decides, you know what, since I'm not targeting the half-breeds now because they've been charged, I'm going to try and damage these Grotesques. So a wound there. Honor Guard do 7 wounds to my Grotesques, which is about right, I think. I think these guys are better at hitting, but they lack the Thunderous, since they were hit first. 8 damage onto the Immortal Guard. They survive a round. That's all they needed to do. Hanging in there, holding up these big phalanx blobs. 2 damage to the half-breed unit, which is okay. I'm not too confident this flank's going to go all the way in my favour. The half-breed unit, they do take damage, but it was not that straightforward that they killed, as you can see. But they did. They were pretty close to surviving though, and this guy may have regretted running away if they had survived, because they would have almost certainly eaten this unit, who were damaged already. And over here, more damage onto my flyer from the individuals, but okay, we're okay with this. This was a long-term possibility. Obviously you'd prefer your flyer not to get grounded at all, but I thought that going all the way around the back to avoid the individuals would have taken me much longer. So you can put it down to good positioning of the enemy individuals as a flyer deterrent. I just chose that the deterrent wouldn't take me that long to chew through, so I decided to go for it anyway. So on the one hand, you can look at that from the opposing point of view and say that putting them there worked because I chose to take the grounding bait and not set up to attack anything else because I decided I'd kill them fast enough. And it works for me because I think I'll get through them quicker and takes out some units that were nicely positioned. And one of them is actually a duke who's inspiring as well. So if I get rid of him, that makes it easier to kill the other units on this side at some point. So I think anytime you're leaving bait in a game of Kings of War, if both players are good, then you have to offer them something useful in exchange, because otherwise why would they take the bait? So I think whether that was bait to kind of double bluff me into coming in here thinking I'll get rid of them quickly, or thinking that my opponent thinks that I wouldn't get through them quickly but that I actually would, then who knows. Maybe my opponent can clarify whether the intent was for these two to be holding up a flyer. And obviously I decided to allow myself to be hit by both of them at the same time rather than just one. with the hope that I can then overrun and kill both of them, possibly in a round, but not in the first round. I have used individuals to kind of put flyers off attacking flanks of armies before. I've used Susan to do that a few times because she's just as fast as big flyers, and if she hits them first, she can sometimes even take them out in a straight up fight. She has less attacks, but she's definitely comparable to one of them in attacking output, certain ones anyway. And because you can go in any direction with them, the big flyers, doesn't matter how far they're flying, they can't get out of your arc when you're an individual, so they are good counters. The faster ones are obviously more useful. These ones, I think, were just well positioned, and it would have taken me a long time to go round. And I think I've spent too long talking about this duel now. So, you can see now, as we go into my turn 3, I've killed the Ghoulie grabber, and then overrun into the next guy, but do not kill him. So I'm held up for longer now. I thought I'd one round this guy, but so in this game, the trend that was coming up was that I was hitting on 3s, rolling a handful of dice, and getting like 3 hits out of it, out of 9 for this guy, or with the half-breeds, rolling 16 dice, hitting on 3s, and getting like 5 or 6 hits out of it. So the units that were hitting on 3s were not performing in this game. So you can see that I killed the Honor Guard, because I was able to get a flank on them with this unit as well. And I do not kill this character with my half-breeds, which is sad. All the gargoyles are just shuffling along again, moving, hiding, getting away from the enemy. So we've got one up there, who's going to be ready to hold this area if everyone else vacates it. This one's ready to hold this corner. This one potentially could contest the centre, but it's looking like the enemy are going to have this one because there's hordes here. So I might cycle them all round again and try and get this one into the enemy middle. It depends, because this flank is not going well. This flank is going very well, but it's not going that well fast. And if the centre falls, and I've just got this lot left, I don't think that's enough to win the game. So I think it's slipping away at this point. I think the flyer is taking too long to get through these individuals, so it was a gamble to get into that fight in the first place. And if he died now, I'd be feeling okay, because I definitely wouldn't get wounded the next time, and then I could charge off and hit something else. But now he could maybe ground me, so let's see. Turn 4, so the Immortal Guard get double charged by the 2 big hordes, so they're going to die. I'm concerned about this Lightning Bolt spellcaster on a Pegasus, who's hiding outside of the charge arc of the Grotesque Champion. The Gargoyles are concerned that he's coming over here to kill them, and that would ruin my day. The Grotesques get wavered from shooting, which is a nightmare. So it's from the various volley guns and the lightning bolts, and being wavered from shooting means they can't do anything because they only have Fury, so they can't countercharge anybody. So I'm only going to be able to hit with limited units in this turn now. The Immortal Guard get killed. So, my flyer, though, does not get wounded. So a bonus there, which means that I can, if this unit hadn't become wavered, I could have triple charged the Horde. 3 units into the front, which is by no means a guarantee of killing it, by the way, because it is a phalanx, and this one, I'm not sure if it's the ensnare one or not. But either way, you have a much better chance of killing it. It's already taken some damage. A triple charge in the front would certainly give me a chance of killing it. Now, because this unit can't join in, I may just have to throw them in and hope for the best. Because if I delay, then they're going to have knights as backup pretty soon, which we don't want. They're far away right now, but that's not going to last long because they've killed the half-breeds now. And turn 4 for me. Gargoyles still shuffling their way around the table, just hiding. And at this point, I considered abandoning the idea of keeping the gargoyles alive and just using them to chaff up the enemy, old school style. But I'm so far committed into this hiding them business. I feel like if I throw them in now, they just die, and then I'm down to like 4 scoring units then, which isn't going to be enough because the enemy have already got everything on this side of the table sewn up. So I think I've left it too long if I was going to throw the gargoyles in as chaff now. If I had thrown them in as chaff, I think this side would have gone a lot better. If I'd been able to block up the knights a bit more, that would have been important. On this side, I don't think it would have helped that much because this side's obviously gone swimmingly anyway. It just took too long. That was the problem over here. The Immortal Guard maybe could have held on longer because I could have been blocking the enemy with gargoyles, but they would have only lasted a turn. All the gargoyles pop out, then they die. So, I double charge in, the Big Flyer and the Grotesques. I've got to make a start on trying to kill this unit now before the Knights arrive, because I just don't have the scoring units available now. So, I don't kill them. Everyone else is just spreading out, preparing for the next turn, and yep, that's a quick one. Turn 5 for the enemy. So, charging into the Grotesques. And I think this unit has gone into the Overmaster. So damage being dished out. Not a huge amount. The Grotesque champion is being shot up, and the Grotesque unit is being shot up, and they die on 12 damage. Wow, wow, wow. So I think it was the Battle Shrine that did that, because it was able, it's so tall that it was able to see them and shoot them without any kind of difficulties. The volley guns couldn't see the Grotesques back there because I'd put the Overmaster in here, which was another reason to throw him in on the charge. So, let's see if anyone dies in combat. The Overmaster takes loads of wounds, but gets double wand. So that's nice. So he's still alive. And the Grotesques get wavered, which is fine because they can countercharge. So, we've got a second chance, but I do not have the units left now. I don't think I've got enough left to kill enough to win at the moment, so I'm just going to try and kill as much as possible. So, turn 5. The Grotesque Champion charges the Battle Shrine from here. Doesn't kill it. Overmaster into one horde, hoping that would be enough to finish them off on his own, but he does not do the job. Grotesques make a start on this unit, and they do not get the job done either, sadly. I do regenerate lots of wounds. And the gargoyles are just chilling out, hiding still. Turn 6 for the League of Rordia. The Overmaster goes down this time. He would have done even if I'd killed them, because some of the knights could have hit him probably. These knights instead go for the Grotesque Champion. The next unit of Grotesques is down, Grotesque Champion's down, so we're down to just gargoyles now. So, obviously this fight hasn't gone the way I was hoping. Was it a mistake getting my flyer bogged down by those infantry heroes and being too optimistic in how fast I'd kill them? In the end, I think I killed them or got free of them about as fast as I expected, because in the final round after I didn't kill one of them, I think maybe it took one turn too long, but one of them didn't wound me, so I was still able to fly off and ignore it. So maybe I should have had a different game plan for the Overmaster and just stayed away from individuals entirely. Maybe I should have tried to go round the back. I don't know. The Grotesques ended up getting killed, but they did dominate this half of the table. The units really got lost because I threw them in. If it was an attrition-based scoring system, like the difference between kill points, then it would have been a terrible idea to start chucking everything in. But because it's only kill points that you score yourself, it doesn't harm me in any way if all my units get killed, so I might as well use them to try and get lucky and bring down enemy units, because I'm not going to be directly competing with my opponent for a spot in the table at the end of the day, because my opponent's going to win, so we're not going to be next to each other, separated by kill points in the leaderboard. So I might as well throw my units in, try and kill things. It doesn't really matter to me if they get killed. So, turn 6 for me. So, here's what I decided to do. The gargoyles, they're not achieving anything now. You don't get any bonus points for victory points. You have to actually win, which isn't going to happen. But I could get more kill points. So, what I can do is fly all the gargoyles out of hiding, hope there's a turn 7, hope my opponent charges them all and double wands them, and then I countercharge them and kill some units. It's a long shot, but if that's the difference between like 2 or 3 places in the table because I get lucky and kill an extra unit, I think it's worth the gamble, because I'm not losing anything by doing this. Even if they die, it doesn't cost me any points. So, do we get turn 7? No. So that's how it ends. And you can see there's still a reasonable amount left for the League of Rordia. I think we both had some cool moves in that game. We both took some risks. Over on the left flank, where the enemy monstrous hero, this one, decided to abandon the flank charge into the half-breeds, that was a risk, but it ended up working out. I think me charging into the standard bear up here, overrunning into a Pegasus, which led to that move, was pretty cool as well. So I think we did see some good stuff. We saw some nice blocking over on this side. And overall, I don't think I've got enough out of this flyer at the event. The only time it really dominated the game was game 2, and that was because the unit of orcs had the mistake of turning their back on the flyer and not factoring him in that he could possibly see them. Let's see. Juggle says, at least Kings of War battles actually look like fights between armies. That is, other than it just being a really good rule set for battles, one of the best things about Kings of War is the visuals. Not only because you're encouraged to take units that kind of do look like an army. You don't see like a long line of models. You see them in big formations like this, but also the scenic basing you can do with the multi-basing options you have in this game. So visually, it might be the best looking game purely for that. And it does look like a battle, and that's what I want Warhammer to be like as well. I think Warhammer Old World should resemble a battle. I think the way the rules are at the moment, it doesn't always look like a battle. Still a fun game, but it could look better. It could look more like the battles they show you in the rule books. So that's the one big issue with that game at the moment, I think. Kings of War, the potential issue coming up is that the command dice have been introduced. And it's not been brought in technically as an optional rule. Technically, all rules are optional, though. If you're running an event, you can just say, I'm changing the rules. But usually, people line up uniformly behind what the official rules are. However, it seems like some tournaments are not going to be using command dice. So that's going to be interesting. And I'm running a tournament in March. If you go to my Facebook group, which is linked below, there's a Kings of War event, which I've put a link to in there. It's on the 23rd of March, which is a Sunday, at the TSN Arena in Nottingham. Kings of War, 2,300 points. There's a special Blood Orange character. It's the Battle of the Blood Orange 2, Segments of Fate. So I don't know whether I'm going to be using command dice at my tournament yet. So we'll see. Anyway, back to this game. Christian says, a very cool and tactical game. How long on average do you and your opponent deliberate how to move and act? I am usually pretty quick, I think. I've usually got an idea of what I'm going to do before my opponent's turn is over. I'm usually looking at things, making sure not to like start lasering lines of sight too early, because then you're giving away what you're going to do while your opponent's turn's still going on, so they can react to it. But I've usually got a pretty good idea most of what I'm going to do in the next turn, so my thinking time isn't that long. Occasionally, if it's just a really dire situation, I'll take a bit longer, looking out of desperation for anything I might have missed. If my opponent is taking a long time to think, and I sense that's the kind of game it is, then the clock is part of the game. So if someone's being very, very slow and very deliberate and tactical, taking a long time reacting to my moves, I might start presenting them more weird angles and situations and blocking them in interesting ways and giving them more things to think about, because that's just their style of play. And giving them more of that is going to eat up more of their time. If there's someone that wants to take a lot of time thinking and that's what they need, then I'm going to try and use that to my advantage and try and waste some of their clock. So later on in the game, they might panic and make some bad moves. So it is a part of the game. And obviously my opponent is free to not think that much, and they're free to just make their moves quicker. So I don't necessarily agree with like turning your back on the enemy to give them triple attacks if they're down to like 10 seconds left on the clock. I'm not sure about that as a tactic, but giving them more tactical options to think about with your positioning, rather than the technicalities of having to roll more dice, the logistics of it, I don't know if that really counts as like a valid strategy. I think that's a bit silly. But even then, if your opponent allows themselves to get down to 10 seconds on the clock, then it's still not your fault. So you're perfectly free to do that, turn your back on the enemy so they can't physically complete all the dice rolls. In this game, my opponent was taking a reasonable amount of time with the thinking, the first couple of turns anyway. After that, we were mostly in combat. So I'd say above average time was taken in this game on thinking, because we were both presenting a lot of interesting blockages and angles for each other, and leaving certain things open which you're not sure if it's a trap or not. And sometimes you can tell when something isn't a trap. If something's too sweet, like in Game 2, that Morax regiment that I was able to charge with my flyer, clearly not a trap. There was nothing covering them, and it didn't drag my flyer into a position I didn't want to be in. So those are the hallmarks of a trap. Is there something covering it? Is the likelihood of success for this so-called trap less than 50%? That's another potential hallmark. And does it draw one of your units away from an important section of the table in a position where maybe it won't be able to get back and support the thing that your opponent's trying to kill on the other side, maybe? But like I always say about traps in wargames, when you're laying out a trap, you have to put something good in the trap or no one's going to take it. So sometimes, even if it is an intentional trap, it is worth taking sometimes, because the bait is just that damn tasty. Oh, we've got some more comments popped up here. Christian says, absolutely, comparing this to when I play 40k, it's mostly just about killing units and towing in on objectives. This is a lot more cinematic. Yes, it is. The Coconut Monkey says, yeah, I'm trying to gauge our local scene if they are using command dice as well, trying to update my Night Stalkers, and I'm stuck on if I buy dice or magic items. At the moment, it seems the community is leaning away from command dice, but it's entirely possible that Mantic will keep pushing them, and then maybe if they come in at official events, people will have to buy them to use them at the official events, and they'll just have them, so then they'll start using them in their own events, because people just own them already, and it'll just become the default. So, I think if Mantic really want it to become a thing, then it will be, but at the moment, there is some resistance that I'm seeing. Juggle says, wish Mantic would acquire the old AEG Clan War miniature game. These rules would be awesome for Clan War. I'm not familiar with that, so you have to let me know a bit more info on what that is, or I could just Google it, but probably not. Coconut says, I think FFG now owns that IP. Well, there you go. Okay, so let me know what you thought about any of these games. If you spotted any rules being played incorrectly as well, let me know. The Abyssal Dwarf list, I think I'm going to stop running the fast Abyssal Dwarf list now, because I think I've proved that it's effective with all the individuals and the gargoyles. I think that works really well. I don't need to keep running it into the ground over and over and over forever. And it hasn't actually won a tournament. I have won a tournament with the Defense 6 Abyssal Dwarves in the past, not with the fast ones, but I like how it's performed over the last year or so. And it's been fun playing it. So what I might do next is play a different army, or I could mix up the Abyssal Dwarves, because there are certain units that have been sitting in the cabinet for a while now, untouched. All the golems, for example. Decimators haven't been used much. What else? The Hellfane. So I can still put out a big wall of Defense 6 army, backed up by gargoyles and half-breed champions, perhaps. That could be something to try. So the golems would be filling the role of the grotesques, which is the slightly slower part of the army that's just survivable. But the golems are obviously more survivable, they just don't hit as hard as the grotesques, potentially, because they can be hindered. And they're a bit slower, so they're not going to be able to hit things en masse. You have to rely on Surge, which you're obviously paying for with more Ironcasters as well. Let's see, Death by Dragons. I'd like to see more creative and different terrain to make the battlefields look more fun in Kings of War, but it's tough to balance a nice simple rule set with more complex terrain. Actually, terrain is something I've been talking about a lot, because I'm playing a lot of different game systems right now. The way they all deal with terrain is generally different, but it's nearly always messy. If you ask someone what's the messiest part of the rule set that you love so much, the answer is usually terrain. Companies just don't seem to have it nailed down perfectly. Kings of War, which I think is a really nice, streamlined, smooth game for the most part, of the weird things there are, quite a few of them are related to terrain. And it's to do with things being like flat or height 0 terrain. There's things like, when are you considered to be on a hill, if you're mostly on a hill, if your leader point's on a hill. It gets quite complicated. And there's probably a simpler way they could do it. The same with woods, like if your leader point's in the woods, if you're an individual, you can't pivot to then see through the woods, things like this. It's complicated. And the rest of the rules aren't so much. Terrain adds an extra layer of complication, which is fine, But I think maybe if you were writing an edition of Kings of War from scratch, you would possibly do terrain a little bit differently. I don't know how exactly. I'm not a rules writer. It's not my job. So if Mantic want to pay me to come in and consult on terrain rules, then maybe. But outside of that, and yeah, terrain. So in the old world, terrain is a bit weird as well. There's certain things that come up, like war machines can pivot in that game and then shoot still. And you can pivot into like the woods and then see through them. There's issues with whether you can see things that are large targets over certain kinds of terrain in the old world, which don't necessarily make that much sense. There's, if you're on a hill, can you see over other units on a hill to see units on the ground? And there's lots of things that they clarify and some things that they don't. In, let's see, what other games have interesting terrain issues? Age of Sigmar, they released their own terrain maps for that game, for each of the different missions, and the actual terrain people have in their collections doesn't match up perfectly with that terrain. So, for example, can you walk on the terrain? Can you walk on all of the woods except for the bit that's the tree? Which seems to be what it suggests in the rules, but it doesn't seem to be outright. There seems to be an element of confusion on the way that like wild woods are treated in Age of Sigmar at the moment. So terrain is a bone of contention, if you will, in most game systems. And I think it's probably because it's a bit of an afterthought in game design. I think the armies are the cool bit, how they fight is the cool bit, and then often the battlefield comes after that. The next level beyond terrain would be like weather conditions that you don't see in most games. You don't often have that kind of thing in a game. And so that's where companies tend to draw the line. They do tend to have terrain. Unless you... Is it War Machine that didn't really have terrain as such? It would just like have a flat little mat and say, okay, this bit you can't see through. Is that how that worked? But usually companies do kind of embrace terrain, just not necessarily very well. I remember in the old Warhammer days, the siege battles, while incredibly cinematic and cool, were never structured particularly well. They were very odd to play. The mechanics were strange and it wasn't really balanced. Let's see, Coconut Monkey. War Machine was all template. Yeah, that's the one. Juggle. Do you think Mantic should hire some of the third-party companies to update their miniature line? I don't know, actually. I'm trying to think of any Mantic armies that are still lacking models in there, that are in the rules that aren't represented by miniatures in their range. There are definitely armies in there like Kingdoms of Men that they just don't have. And there's a lot of human armies out there that people use. So if I was Mantic, I would consolidate lots of the armies that are almost identical. I don't think League of Rordia and Kingdoms of Men need to exist. I think they could mash them all together. They're just humans, they have cavalry, they have infantry, they have war machines. I don't see what the big deal would be with that. Death by Dragon. So many gaps in the range, even their new ones, e.g. Rift Forged Orcs, has no Rift Walkers. Yeah, there's definitely a few things out there. Which other armies are sadly lacking in their army lists? Abyssal Dwarfs, I think, are doing alright. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that doesn't have a model, except for the dogs. Can you get a hunting pack as a unit, or do you have to use the mutated mastiffs from the box of Black Souls when you only get like 2 in it? So that could be one. Apparently Goblin Wingets you can't get anymore because they're Vanguard models. Oh. So are they just in like a Vanguard starter set now? Or are they just gone forever? Entirely? Do they even sell any Vanguard products anymore? Kings of War Vanguard, by the way, I don't mind people knowing that I think that game was complete garbage. I also think Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team was complete garbage. Whichever edition of it was I played must have been like 7 years ago. But that and Kings of War Vanguard I just think were really, really bad. Vanguard, I played in a couple of events, so I'm not giving an opinion without having ever played it. It just felt like a total mess. A lot of elements in game design that I think are very negative were present in that game. One that pops out immediately in my mind is that you have to kill things multiple times. You kind of kill it, but then that just knocks it down and then it can stand up again. And I think if they wanted to make things more survivable, they should have just given them more hit points. That's usually what I say about games. Get rid of mechanics that undo the work that your opponent's done, and instead just make them have to do more work so they can feel like they're making progress. It's not just being undone. So at the thin end of that spectrum, you've got like armor saves, which are obviously undoing the wounds you've just done. But that's instant, like the wound hasn't been applied yet. So it's not as feel bad as like regeneration, which is you've done the wounds and now a load of them randomly come back. And then beyond that, you've got whole units coming back to life, which is a big thing in Age of Sigmar. Most armies can bring units back or summon extra things onto the table, which are definitely feel bad mechanics, I think. So if I ever design a big battle game system and I put in loads of resurrection mechanics and healing mechanics, then you can call me out on it, because I think they're inherently bad game design. I think you should reward players for progressing towards killing something, and you shouldn't be reversing it. Just my opinion. Thematically, I can understand units like trolls regenerating. That's just a thing, an accepted fantasy thing, that trolls will regenerate if you don't kill them outright. Hydras with their heads growing back, I'll allow it. But everything else doing it, I don't like. Same with units being resurrected, particularly in Age of Sigmar. Undead, fine, you should be bringing up fresh units of skeletons. You shouldn't just be popping up like a unit of trolls because you've got your big moon shrine. Trolls shouldn't just be coming back to life. It's just weird. And makes games take longer. Okay. Apparently Vanguard seems to be totally gone and dead at the moment. Maybe they'll relaunch it with a rule set that's good, but I wouldn't hold my breath because they seem to be focusing on other projects, including what's the other mini Kings of War called now, where you're playing with less points. I can't remember because it doesn't really interest me, but I've seen people playing that actually. But it's definitely not called Vanguard, because that was like the skirmish game with bad rules, in my opinion. Ambush, that's the one. Never played it, not really interested. Similar to Age of Sigmar Spearhead, I think it's called as well, which is the same kind of thing. You're just playing with less models on a slightly smaller table. And no, I'm playing those games because I want to play big battles. Let's see, apparently new rule set for Ambush is coming soon. Again, not for me, but if it gets people into the game because they can start with a smaller army, then so be it. Okay. I think it's about time to wrap this one up. How long's this been going? Over 2 hours for just a 3-game event. That's pretty good going. Had pretty good viewership, actually, throughout. So, give me your thoughts in the comments if you're watching this later. Let me know what you'd like to see next. Would you like to see me use Abyssal Dwarfs with more of my Defense 6 stuff in there, mixing in with the new cool fast stuff that was improved last year? Would you like to see the Night Stalkers come back out to play again? Would you like to see the Goblins? Would you like to see Undead, who I also have? Would you like to see... what could I use my Undead Halflings as now? Either Undead, or I used to use them as Rordia. So theoretically they could still be used as Rordians. I think all the units still work for the League of Rordia, so I could run that still. They're all a bit short, but they could pass for human Rordians in halfling skeleton form. So I've got lots of options. What do you want to see from Kings of War? The next event I'm signed up for Kings of War is... let's have a look in the old tournament calendar. So there isn't one before the end of the year that I've signed up for at this stage. There is one coming up that I'm considering, but it involves a bit of journeying. There's one in the middle of next year that I've signed up for already, which I think is now sold out. There's my event, obviously, in March, which is, by the way, anyone who's purely Kings of War fan and not a Dead Zone fan, because I'm running my Kings of War and Dead Zone events on one weekend, so it's Dead Zone on the Saturday this time and Kings of War on the Sunday. If you're purely a Kings of War fan, then there's my event on the Sunday, Battle of the Blood Orange 2. There's also, in Birmingham, the Birmingham Bull Run the day before, which is opposite my Dead Zone event. So if you're not into Dead Zone, then why not consider attending the Birmingham Bull Run and Battle of the Blood Orange 2 in one weekend? 2 Kings of War events in the Midlands at the same weekend. Anyone who does that and attends both of them, I think, earns special respect and honour in my eyes. Okay, what's coming up next? Next week, something new and exciting, Star Wars Shatterpoint tournament. I don't even have models for it yet, but I'm probably borrowing someone's Ewoks. I've ordered some other models though, so eventually I'll get those painted up. People have been playing it down at the club, it's a fun game, and you'll probably see a bit of that on the channel. I haven't done battle reports on the games I've had so far because I just don't know the rules well enough and I wouldn't be able to explain it very well on video yet. So I've got another game coming up this week at the club and then a tournament on Saturday next week. Then after that there are some Warhammer Old World events. There's 2. There's one that's just a normal event and then there's one that's like a thematic river based event where all the tables are going to have rivers on them and special rules around that. There's Age of Sigmar at the end of this month as well. And yeah, so November is a very busy month. I've got an event pretty much every weekend. Extremely busy. Okay, I think it's time to end this video then. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description. There is the Facebook group, Discord server, follow me on Twitter and all that good stuff. And if you would like an endless stream of non-stop wargaming goodness flowing into your YouTube feed so that you can feast on the tactical deliciousness and sup on its juices of knowledge to improve your own game at one of many game systems, including, but not limited to, already playing at events, Kings of War, Dead Zone, Dreadball, Warhammer Old World, Age of Sigmar, upcoming Star Wars Shatterpoint, getting back into Bolt Action, Epic Warpath. That's 8 game systems that are going to be covered on this channel, hopefully, over the next year. And I'm always on the lookout for more, including, potentially, guinea pig based games, which I may well have been involved in playtesting for. Keep your eyes peeled for that. So, if you enjoy all that stuff and want it to continue flowing, why not pledge your entire life savings on the Patreon or the PayPal links down there as well. And all that money goes directly into paying for my tournament attendance, basically. So why not? Why not sell your own home, take out a second mortgage, sell all your belongings, and then pledge all that money to this channel? Sounds like a great idea for everybody. I'll let that linger for a moment while you look at the video thumbnail. And all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.